Chapter 1. The Wounded CEO. The evening sun, a molten ball of gold and saffron, bled across the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across Isel Chosen's penthouse office. The light, for all its warmth, found no purchase on the cold, sterile surfaces of marble and chrome. It only served to highlight the stark finality of the documents laid out before him on the vast, mahogany desk, the divorce papers. Each page was a testament to a colossal failure, a monument to a trust so utterly shattered it seemed impossible it had ever existed. At 35, Isel had cultivated an empire that spanned continents, its tendrils reaching into technology, finance, and logistics. He was a king in a world of his own making, his name a whispered synonym for ruthless efficiency and untouchable success. Yet, in this moment, bathed in the dying light of the day, he felt like that small-town boy again, the one with worn-out shoes and dreams that were far too big for his britches, the boy who had once believed in the impossible. Now, the impossible was the gaping chasm where his marriage used to be. His fingers, long and elegant, traced the smooth, cool edge of the desk. He remembered the day it had been delivered. It was carved from a single piece of mahogany, a gift to himself after his first billion-dollar acquisition. It was meant to be a symbol of permanence, of unshakable foundation. Now, it felt like a sarcophagus holding the remains of his personal life. He stared at his soon-to-be ex-wife's signature on the final page. The elegant, looping curves of Adrienne's handwriting, once a source of quiet admiration, now seemed as false and performative as their 5-year marriage had been. Each stroke was a carefully crafted lie. "Mr. Chosen?" His assistant's voice, crisp and professional, crackled through the intercom, yanking him from the mire of his thoughts. It was Marcus Chin, his head of legal and the closest thing he had to a confidant, though their relationship was still buffered by the formalities of their positions. "The board is waiting in conference room A." Isel's hand moved to the response button, his movements economical and precise. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," he replied, his voice a low baritone, steady and controlled despite the storm raging within him. Professionalism was his armor, a finely tailored suit of indifference he wore to shield himself from a world that had taught him, in the most brutal way imaginable, that trust was a luxury he could not afford. He stood, the motion fluid, and adjusted the charcoal Tom Ford suit that clung to his athletic frame. It wasn't just clothing. It was a uniform, a second skin that projected an aura of invincibility. He walked to the wall-to-wall windows, a sheer curtain of glass that offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city he'd conquered. Skyscrapers, like crystal and steel monoliths, reached for a sky painted in bruised shades of amber and rose. He saw the spire of the Oakhaven Tower, the glittering ribbon of the Grand Central Bridge. He owned a piece of it all. 5 years ago, he'd stood in this exact spot with Adrienne. She had her arms wrapped around his waist, her head on his shoulder, as they watched the same sunset. She'd spoken of their future, of children who would one day look out at this same view, of a legacy they would build together. Now, those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life, a film he'd watched with detached curiosity. The emotions were gone, cauterized by the searing heat of betrayal. On his desk, next to the divorce papers, was a plain manila envelope. Its contents were far more painful than any legal document. Inside were photographs, the cold, hard evidence of Adrienne's duplicity that his private investigator had meticulously collected. He didn't need to look at them again. The images were seared into his memory. Stolen kisses in a sun-dappled London cafe, her hand intimately resting on another man's chest. Secret meetings in the hushed, anonymous lobbies of 5-star hotels in Paris, her laughter caught mid-peal, a sound he had once cherished. And finally, the damning proof, the image that had shattered his world. Adrienne, at a private gala in Monaco, accepting a diamond ring from James Hartford, the CEO of Hartford Global, his most dangerous corporate rival. The most sickening detail was that she was still wearing the wedding band Isel had placed on her finger. The 2 rings, one symbolizing a sacred vow and the other a treacherous new allegiance, sat side by side on her hand. His phone buzzed on the desk, a low thrum against the wood. A text from his younger sister, Rain. "Big brother, please tell me you're not still at the office. You need to rest." A bitter, humorless smile curved Isel's lips. Rest. Sleep. They had become distant memories, luxuries from a life he no longer lived. The discovery had come 3 weeks ago, on a day that had started with crushing normalcy. He'd had a routine video call with Adrienne, who was supposedly in London for a temporary consulting position she'd claimed was a massive career opportunity. She looked flushed, vibrant, happy even, as she spoke about her projects. He'd felt a pang of pride for her ambition. It wasn't until later that day, when the first report from his PI landed in his inbox with a soft, digital chime, that he understood the true source of her joy. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a devastating professional blow. Hartford Global had been circling Chosen Industries for years, like a shark sensing blood in the water. What better way to gain an advantage, to glean insider information, than to seduce the CEO's wife? The thought made Bao rise in his throat. Had their pillow talk been transcribed and sent to a competitor? Had her access to his life been one long, calculated act of corporate espionage? He walked to the wet bar tucked into a corner of the office, its marble countertop cool beneath his fingertips. He poured himself 2 fingers of Glenfiddich 30-year-old, a gift from his father on the day he'd taken over as CEO. The amber liquid swirled in the heavy crystal tumbler. "Never let them see you bleed, son." His father's words echoed in his mind, a mantra from a man forged in old-school business ethics and stoicism. The old man had been right about so many things. Isel swallowed the scotch, the liquor burning a pleasant, fiery path down his throat, momentarily scorching away the cold knot of dread in his stomach. His reflection in the bar's mirrored back caught his eye. He looked like a stranger. Dark, bruised circles shadowed his steel-gray eyes, and his black hair, usually styled with military precision, showed signs of him running his fingers through it too often, a nervous tic he thought he'd conquered years ago. He looked every bit the wounded man he was. But he'd be damned if he'd let anyone else see it. A soft, deferential knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called out, his voice sharp as he straightened his shoulders, slipping the mask of the Ice King back into place. Marcus Chen stepped in, holding another stack of papers. Marcus was in his early 40s, his demeanor perpetually calm, his suits always immaculate. He was the epitome of efficiency and discretion. "The final settlement documents are ready for your review, sir." Isel nodded, gesturing for Marcus to place them on the desk, away from the poison of the divorce papers. "Any surprises?" "No, sir." As expected, Mrs. Chosen, Ms. Reynolds now, has agreed to all terms, including the non-disclosure agreement. She's waiving any claim to company shares or property. "Of course she is," Isel said, his voice laced with acid. "Hartford Global has made sure she won't need anything from her soon-to-be ex-husband." The thought made his hand tighten around the crystal tumbler, the edges pressing into his skin. "Sir," Marcus hesitated, a rare sign of discomfort from the unflappable lawyer. "There's something else. The board is concerned about the succession issue." Ah, there it was. The real reason for today's emergency board meeting. The true dagger twisting in the wound. The bylaws of Chosen Industries, written by his traditionalist father decades ago, contained a clause as archaic as it was ironclad. To maintain controlling interest, the CEO was required to be married, with a clear path to producing an heir. It was a measure to ensure stability, to project an image of legacy and family values to the shareholders. It had never been an issue before. He and Adrian had been young, with what he thought was a lifetime ahead of them for children. Now, at 35, with his divorce about to be finalized and his position potentially at risk, it had become a critical, ticking time bomb. "They're worried about stability," Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on a point just over Isel's shoulder. "Especially with Hartford Global circling. The shareholders need reassurance. They see a divorced, childless CEO, and they see weakness." Isel set his glass down with deliberate, almost silent care. He walked back to the window, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the deepening twilight. "Tell me, Marcus," he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "How does one find a wife who won't sell company secrets to the highest bidder? How does one find a woman who isn't a Trojan horse waiting to burn your kingdom to the ground?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "There are arrangements that can be made, sir. Contract marriages are not uncommon in our circles. A strategic alliance, framed for the public as a whirlwind romance. A contract marriage." The idea should have repulsed him. It was a cynical, hollow mockery of the institution he had, until recently, believed in. Yet, as he stared at his own fractured reflection in the glass, something about its cold, businesslike nature appealed to his wounded heart. No emotions. No vulnerability. No chances for betrayal. Just clear terms, mutual benefit, and a definitive end date. A transaction. He understood transactions. Draw up a preliminary contract, he found himself saying, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Something ironclad. "I want clauses for everything. Infidelity, corporate espionage, social media behavior. A non-negotiable prenuptial agreement. Leave nothing to chance." Marcus nodded, already making notes on his tablet, his professionalism a comforting anchor in the chaos. Any specific requirements for potential candidates, sir? Isel's gaze swept back to the glittering cityscape. He was no longer looking for a partner. He was hiring for a position. Someone intelligent. Intelligent enough to understand exactly what they're signing up for, and discreet enough to play the part convincingly. A professional background, preferably in finance or law. No existing connections to any competing corporations. He paused, the final requirement the most important. And absolutely no one from the social circles Adrian frequented. I want someone unknown. Someone clean. I'll have HR begin discreet screenings immediately, Marcus replied, his fingers flying across the screen. The board meeting, Isel said, his mind already shifting gears, strategizing, rebuilding his defenses. Yes, I know. I'm coming. He walked back to his desk, gathered the divorce papers, and slipped them into a locked drawer. Out of sight, if not out of mind. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when the sharks were circling, waiting for any sign of vulnerability. As he followed Marcus toward the conference room, his mind was already a whirlwind of calculations. He'd been a fool once, believing in love and happy endings. He wouldn't make that mistake again. This time, marriage would be what it should have been all along for a man in his position, a business transaction. Nothing more. The grand, frosted glass doors of the conference room loomed ahead. Isel straightened his tie, the silk smooth beneath his fingers. His expression settled into the masked perfection that had earned him the nickname the Ice King in business circles. Let them whisper about his failed marriage. Let them wonder about succession plans. He would walk into that room and project nothing but unshakable strength. He would show them all that Isel Chosen didn't break. He rebuilt. Stronger, colder, and more impenetrable than before. Little did he know that fate, with its cruel sense of irony, had other plans. And that somewhere across the sprawling, indifferent city, a young financial analyst named Kaylee, buried under spreadsheets and worry, was about to receive a phone call that would shatter her world and, in doing so, irrevocably change both of their lives forever. The financial analysis department at Sterling & Associates was a ghost town. At 7:30 p.m., the only sounds were the gentle, rhythmic hum of dormant computers and the frantic, almost silent tapping of Kaylee fingers across her keyboard. The blue-white glow of her triple-monitor setup cast an ethereal light on her face, highlighting the intense focus in her green eyes, which were the color of new spring leaves flecked with gold. Most of her colleagues, ambitious as they were, had surrendered to the call of evening hours ago, retreating to happy hours, family dinners, or overpriced gym memberships. But for Kaylee, late nights weren't a choice. They were a necessity. At 26, she was the youngest financial analyst in the firm's prestigious history, a fact she was proud of, but one that also meant she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. The real driver, however, wasn't ambition. It was a relentless, gnawing anxiety that sat like a stone in her stomach. Every extra hour she worked, every complex data set she untangled, translated into another dollar toward her mother's mounting medical bills. It was a slow, grueling marathon against a ticking clock. A small notification popped up on the bottom right corner of her screen, a stark, unwelcome reminder in a bold red font. Hospital payment due, $12,450.78. Her shoulders, which she hadn't realized were tense, tightened into a solid knot of stress. She quickly minimized the window, as if hiding it from view could make the debt disappear. 3 more years. 3 more years of her mother's experimental cancer treatment, a cutting-edge protocol that offered a sliver of hope where all others had failed. The insurance, after months of bureaucratic wrangling, had agreed to cover 60%. The remaining 40% felt like a mountain she had to climb with pebbles in her shoes. Sometimes, it felt like drowning in slow motion, the surface just inches away but always unreachable. Still here, Wonder Girl? Kaylee jumped, her hand hovering over her mouse. She looked up to find Jasmine, the office manager, leaning against the fabric wall of her cubicle. Jasmine was an enigma of perpetual perfection. Despite the late hour, her makeup was flawless, her designer outfit unwrinkled, and not a single strand of her sleek black bob was out of place. She was everything Kaylee was not. In her modest navy blazer, sensible shoes, and hair pulled back in a practical but slightly frizzy bun, Kaylee felt like a different species. Just finishing up the Morrison Group analysis, Kaylee replied, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. The glasses were her one small vanity. Designer frames, a splurge from her first ever bonus, that brought out the subtle gold flecks in her eyes and made her feel, if only for a moment, like she belonged in this world of high-powered finance. Jasmine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in amusement. You might want to hold off on that one. Word on the street is that Drake Morrison is more interested in a hostile takeover of Chosen Industries than any legitimate business venture with us. Kaylee's interest, professional and personal, was immediately piqued. She'd been following Chosen Industries' stock movements for months, a private project she worked on in her spare time. She had noted erratic patterns, subtle tremors in the market that suggested internal turmoil long before the public rumors started. The recent, explosive news of CEO Isel Chosen's impending divorce had sent shockwaves through the financial world, though the details remained surprisingly, almost suspiciously, private. Speaking of Chosen, Jasmine continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a tone that meant prime office gossip was about to be served. HR's been getting some interesting calls. About you. Me? Kaylee blinked, her analytical mind struggling to process this new, unexpected data point. Her hand froze over her mouse. Why would anyone be calling HR about me? Jasmine shrugged, a delicate motion of her shoulders, but her eyes gleamed with a curiosity that belied her casual posture. No idea. But it wasn't just anyone. Marcus Chin himself was asking about your background check results. The deep dive they did when you were hired. Marcus Chun, head of legal at Chosen Industries. The name reverberated in Kaylee's mind. It was like hearing that a god from Mount Olympus had been asking about the work of a lowly scribe. Her brain, trained to find patterns and connect dots, went into overdrive. She tried to construct a logical scenario, but the pieces wouldn't fit. Why would one of the most powerful and secretive corporations in the country be interested in a junior financial analyst from a mid-tier firm? It made no sense. Just as she was about to ask Jasmine for more details, her personal phone, lying face down on her desk, buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Normally, she'd let it go straight to voicemail, assuming it was another robocall or a debt collector for a bill she'd forgotten to defer. But something, a premonition, a flicker of intuition, made her answer. Kaylee Iden speaking. Miss Iden, a crisp, professional voice inquired on the other end. The tone was polite but carried an undercurrent of authority that demanded attention. This is Marcus Chun from Chosen Industries. I apologize for calling so late, but we have a rather urgent and confidential matter to discuss. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? Kaylee's heart began to race, a frantic drumming against her ribs, but years of presenting financial data to intimidating executives had taught her to keep her voice steady. May I ask what this is regarding? I'm afraid I can only discuss the details in person, Marcus replied smoothly. However, I can assure you it is a legitimate business proposition. One that could be life-changing. Life-changing. The phrase hung in the air, charged with possibility. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the minimized hospital bill notification flicker on her screen. A life-changing amount of debt. A life-changing opportunity. The two concepts collided in her mind. I'll need to check with my supervisor, she stammered, clinging to the familiar comfort of corporate protocol. That's already been arranged, Marcus interrupted, his efficiency almost unnerving. Your director has been informed that we are requesting your consultation on a sensitive matter. A car will pick you up at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. We will send the address to your phone. The call ended. Kaylee sat back in her chair, the receiver still pressed to her ear for a moment, her mind whirling like a centrifuge. She looked up, but Jasmine had disappeared, melting back into the evening shadows as silently as she had appeared, leaving Kaylee alone with her thoughts and the gentle, indifferent hum of the computers. The Morrison Group analysis lay forgotten on her screen. The next morning found her in the back of a sleek, black Mercedes, the kind of car that glided through city traffic with an air of untouchable importance. The scent of real leather and quiet wealth filled her senses. She watched the city transform through the tinted windows, the familiar, modest brick buildings of her neighborhood giving way to the gleaming, crystalline towers of the financial district. The Chosen Industries building rose like a spear of glass and steel against the morning sky, its 100 stories reflecting the nascent sunrise. It was a monument to power, a physical manifestation of the man who had built it. Security cleared her with a surprising, almost unnerving efficiency. Her name was already on a high-priority list. Before she knew it, she was being led to a private elevator, one that didn't have buttons for other floors. Her reflection in its mirrored walls showed a young woman trying very hard to project a composure she did not feel. Her honey blonde hair was twisted into a neat, professional bun, not a single stray strand daring to escape. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to emphasize her natural features and hide the dark circles from a sleepless night. And she was wearing her best suit, a dark gray ensemble that was the most expensive piece in her wardrobe, purchased on sale for an interview 2 years ago. It was her armor. The elevator doors opened directly into a serene, minimalist reception area. Marcus Chun was waiting for her, his reputation for efficiency evident in every crisp movement as he greeted her. "Miss Iden, thank you for coming. Please, follow me." He led her not to a standard office, but to a massive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, three-sided view of the city below. But Kaylee barely noticed the spectacular vista. Her attention was immediately and completely drawn to the man standing at the head of the long, polished table. Isel chosen. He commanded attention the way gravity commanded mass. It was simply a law of nature. Tall and impeccably dressed in a custom suit that seemed to be molded to his athletic build, he radiated an aura of power and absolute control. The media had not exaggerated, but it was his eyes that truly captivated her. They were steel gray, intensely focused, and held shadows she recognized from her own reflection in the mirror late at night. The eyes of someone carrying a heavy, invisible burden. "Miss Iden," he said. His voice was deep, with a slight, almost imperceptible roughness that suggested a chronic lack of sleep. "Please sit." She took the offered chair, her movements stiff, hyper-aware of his presence as he remained standing, studying her with an unreadable, almost clinical expression. It felt like being a specimen under a microscope. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your analysis of the Morrison Group's financial strategies," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "Particularly your notes on their pattern of hostile takeovers through personal leverage. It's impressive work." Kaylee's mind raced. That analysis was a work in progress, saved on her local drive, not yet submitted to her supervisors. How could he possibly have seen it? "We have our ways," he cut in, as if reading her thoughts. The casual statement held a chilling implication of his reach. More importantly, it demonstrates exactly the kind of insight we need. He paused, his gray eyes pinning her to her seat. "Tell me, Miss Iden, what do you know about contract marriages?" The question was so unexpected, so utterly out of left field, that for a moment, Kaylee thought she'd misheard him. She must have looked as stunned as she felt, because Marcus Chin chose that moment to slide a thick, leather-bound document across the table toward her. "We are offering you a business proposition, Miss Iden," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "A marriage contract. 2 years minimum, with very specific terms. And considerable compensation." Kaylee's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. The numbers on the first page made her breath catch in her throat. It was an astronomical sum. Enough to cover her mother's treatment 10 times over. Enough to set them up for life, to erase every financial worry she had ever had. It was the kind of money that solved every problem she could imagine. Why me?" she managed to ask, proud that her voice remained steady, a small island of calm in the swirling chaos of her mind. Isel finally sat down, his movements graceful and deliberate despite his obvious fatigue. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, fixing her with that intense gaze. "Because you're brilliant, but you're unknown. You have no public profile. Because your background check shows a history of absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty to your employers. And," he paused, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "because you have a pressing, immediate need that we can solve, while you help us maintain stability during a crucial period of transition." Her mother's face flashed in her mind, pale but brave in her sterile hospital bed, trying to hide her pain behind a weak smile. The ever-present, crushing weight of the medical bills. "The medical bills," she whispered, the words barely audible. "All covered," Marcus confirmed, tapping a section in the document. "In full, plus a substantial trust fund established for her future care, along with other benefits, detailed in Section 3. Kaylee forced herself to think. to be the analyst, to approach this like any other business proposition, stripping away the shocking, personal nature of it. And what, exactly, would be required of me? Public appearances as my wife, Isel stated, his tone all business again. Residence in my penthouse. Participation in social and corporate events relevant to the company. He paused, his expression hardening slightly, the shadows in his eyes deepening. And an heir, within the 2-year period. An heir. The clinical, detached term couldn't disguise the raw, intimate reality of what that meant. Kaylee felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression professional, her face an unreadable mask. The contract includes strict confidentiality clauses, Marcus added, his voice pulling her back to the legalities, and significant financial penalties for any breach of terms, particularly regarding business intelligence, or, he glanced at Isel, personal matters. Kaylee understood the unspoken reference, the betrayal of his ex-wife. The whole business world was rife with rumors, though the specifics had been kept surprisingly quiet, a testament to Isel Chosen's power. How long do I have to decide? She asked, her mind already calculating probabilities, weighing risks and rewards, trying to build a logical framework around an illogical choice. Until 5 p.m. today, Isel replied, standing up, the meeting clearly over from his perspective. I have a board meeting at 6 o'clock, where I need to present them with either a signed contract or a different solution. He moved to leave, then paused beside her chair. He was so close she could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like bergamot and cedar. She could see the faint shadow of stubble along his strong jaw. Miss Iden, he said, his voice lower now, almost gentle, a stark contrast to his public persona. I know this is overwhelming, but sometimes, the most life-changing opportunities come disguised as impossible choices. After they left, Kaylee sat alone in the vast, silent conference room, staring at the contract that lay before her like a Pandora's box. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the city in the bright, unforgiving light of morning. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis of glass and concrete was her mother's hospital, where monthly bills arrived with the relentless regularity of a terminal illness. Somewhere was her tiny, rented apartment, with its second-hand furniture and carefully planned budgets. And here, in this room, high above it all, was a chance to change everything. A chance to save her mother, to secure their future. The cost was only 2 years of her life. 2 years of playing a role. And her heart's independence. Little did she know, as she reached for the heavy, expensive pen with trembling fingers, that she was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about business, loyalty, and love. And that the man who had just left the room, carrying his own carefully guarded wounds, would become far more than just a name on a contract. The financial analysis department at Sterling & Associates was a ghost town. At 7:30 p.m., the only sounds were the gentle, rhythmic hum of dormant computers and the frantic, almost silent tapping of Kaylee Iden's fingers across her keyboard. The blue-white glow of her triple-monitor setup cast an ethereal light on her face, highlighting the intense focus in her green eyes, which were the color of new spring leaves flecked with gold. Most of her colleagues, ambitious as they were, had surrendered to the call of evening hours ago, retreating to happy hours, family dinners, or overpriced gym memberships. But for Kaylee, late nights weren't a choice. They were a necessity. At 26, she was the youngest financial analyst in the firm's prestigious history, a fact she was proud of, but one that also meant she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. The real driver, however, wasn't ambition. It was a relentless, gnawing anxiety that sat like a stone in her stomach. Every extra hour she worked, every complex data set she untangled, translated into another dollar toward her mother's mounting medical bills. It was a slow, grueling marathon against a ticking clock. A small notification popped up on the bottom right corner of her screen, a stark, unwelcome reminder in a bold red font. Hospital payment due, $12,450.78. Her shoulders, which she hadn't realized were tense, tightened into a solid knot of stress. She quickly minimized the window, as if hiding it from view could make the debt disappear. 3 more years. 3 more years of her mother's experimental cancer treatment. a cutting-edge protocol that offered a sliver of hope where all others had failed. The insurance, after months of bureaucratic wrangling, had agreed to cover 60%. The remaining 40% felt like a mountain she had to climb with pebbles in her shoes. Sometimes, it felt like drowning in slow motion, the surface just inches away but always unreachable. Still here, Wonder Girl? Kaylee jumped, her hand hovering over her mouse. She looked up to find Jasmine, the office manager, leaning against the fabric wall of her cubicle. Jasmine was an enigma of perpetual perfection. Despite the late hour, her makeup was flawless, her designer outfit unwrinkled, and not a single strand of her sleek black bob was out of place. She was everything Kaylee was not. In her modest navy blazer, sensible shoes, and hair pulled back in a practical but slightly frizzy bun, Kaylee felt like a different species. Just finishing up the Morrison Group analysis, Kaylee replied, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. The glasses were her one small vanity. Designer frames, a splurge from her first-ever bonus, that brought out the subtle gold flecks in her eyes and made her feel, if only for a moment, like she belonged in this world of high-powered finance. Jasmine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in amusement. You might want to hold off on that one. Word on the street is that Drake Morrison is more interested in a hostile takeover of Chosen Industries than any legitimate business venture with us. Kaylee's interest, professional and personal, was immediately piqued. She'd been following Chosen Industries' stock movements for months, a private project she worked on in her spare time. She had noted erratic patterns, subtle tremors in the market that suggested internal turmoil long before the public rumors started. The recent, explosive news of CEO Isel Chosen's impending divorce had sent shockwaves through the financial world, though the details remained surprisingly, almost suspiciously, private. Speaking of Chosen, Jasmine continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a tone that meant prime office gossip was about to be served. HR's been getting some interesting calls. About you. Me? Kaylee blinked, her analytical mind struggling to process this new, unexpected data point. Her hand froze over her mouse. Why would anyone be calling HR about me? Jasmine shrugged, a delicate motion of her shoulders, but her eyes gleamed with a curiosity that belied her casual posture. No idea, but it wasn't just anyone. Marcus Chin himself was asking about your background check results. The deep dive they did when you were hired. Marcus Chun, head of legal at Chosen Industries. The name reverberated in Kaylee's mind. It was like hearing that a god from Mount Olympus had been asking about the work of a lowly scribe. Her brain, trained to find patterns and connect dots, went into overdrive. She tried to construct a logical scenario, but the pieces wouldn't fit. Why would one of the most powerful and secretive corporations in the country be interested in a junior financial analyst from a mid-tier firm? It made no sense. Just as she was about to ask Jasmine for more details, her personal phone, lying face down on her desk, buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Normally, she'd let it go straight to voicemail, assuming it was another robocall or a debt collector for a bill she'd forgotten to defer. But something, a premonition, a flicker of intuition, made her answer. Kaylee Iden speaking. Miss Iden, a crisp, professional voice inquired on the other end. The tone was polite but carried an undercurrent of authority that demanded attention. This is Marcus Chun from Chosen Industries. I apologize for calling so late, but we have a rather urgent and confidential matter to discuss. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? Kaylee's heart began to race, a frantic drumming against her ribs, but years of presenting financial data to intimidating executives had taught her to keep her voice steady. May I ask what this is regarding? I'm afraid I can only discuss the details in person, Marcus replied smoothly. However, I can assure you it is a legitimate business proposition. One that could be life-changing. Life-changing. The phrase hung in the air, charged with possibility. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the minimized hospital bill notification flicker on her screen. A life-changing amount of debt. A life-changing opportunity. The two concepts collided in her mind. I'll need to check with my supervisor, she stammered, clinging to the familiar comfort of corporate protocol. That's already been arranged, Marcus interrupted, his efficiency almost unnerving. Your director has been informed that we are requesting your consultation on a sensitive matter. A car will pick you up at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. We will send the address to your phone. The call ended. Kaylee sat back in her chair, the receiver still pressed to her ear for a moment, her mind whirling like a centrifuge. She looked up, but Jasmine had disappeared, melting back into the evening shadows as silently as she had appeared, leaving Kaylee alone with her thoughts and the gentle, indifferent hum of the computers. The Morrison Group analysis lay forgotten on her screen. The next morning found her in the back of a sleek, black Mercedes, the kind of car that glided through city traffic with an air of untouchable importance. The scent of real leather and quiet wealth filled her senses. She watched the city transform through the tinted windows, the familiar, modest brick buildings of her neighborhood giving way to the gleaming, crystalline towers of the financial district. The Chosen Industries building rose like a spear of glass and steel against the morning sky, its 100 stories reflecting the nascent sunrise. It was a monument to power, a physical manifestation of the man who had built it. Security cleared her with a surprising, almost unnerving efficiency. Her name was already on a high-priority list. Before she knew it, she was being led to a private elevator, one that didn't have buttons for other floors. Her reflection in its mirrored walls showed a young woman trying very hard to project a composure she did not feel. Her honey blonde hair was twisted into a neat, professional bun, not a single stray strand daring to escape. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to emphasize her natural features and hide the dark circles from a sleepless night. And she was wearing her best suit, a dark gray ensemble that was the most expensive piece in her wardrobe, purchased on sale for an interview 2 years ago. It was her armor. The elevator doors opened directly into a serene, minimalist reception area. Marcus Chun was waiting for her, his reputation for efficiency evident in every crisp movement as he greeted her. "Miss Iden, thank you for coming. Please, follow me." He led her not to a standard office, but to a massive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, three-sided view of the city below. But Kaylee barely noticed the spectacular vista. Her attention was immediately and completely drawn to the man standing at the head of the long, polished table. Isel Chosen. He commanded attention the way gravity commanded mass. It was simply a law of nature. Tall and impeccably dressed in a custom suit that seemed to be molded to his athletic build, he radiated an aura of power and absolute control. The media had not exaggerated, but it was his eyes that truly captivated her. They were steel gray, intensely focused, and held shadows she recognized from her own reflection in the mirror late at night. The eyes of someone carrying a heavy, invisible burden. "Miss Iden," he said. His voice was deep, with a slight, almost imperceptible roughness that suggested a chronic lack of sleep. "Please sit." She took the offered chair, her movements stiff, hyper-aware of his presence as he remained standing, studying her with an unreadable, almost clinical expression. It felt like being a specimen under a microscope. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your analysis of the Morrison Group's financial strategies," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "Particularly your notes on their pattern of hostile takeovers through personal leverage. It's impressive work." Kaylee's mind raced. That analysis was a work in progress, saved on her local drive, not yet submitted to her supervisors. How could he possibly have seen it? "We have our ways," he cut in, as if reading her thoughts. The casual statement held a chilling implication of his reach. More importantly, it demonstrates exactly the kind of insight we need. He paused, his gray eyes pinning her to her seat. "Tell me, Miss Iden, what do you know about contract marriages?" The question was so unexpected, so utterly out of left field, that for a moment, Kaylee thought she'd misheard him. She must have looked as stunned as she felt, because Marcus Chin chose that moment to slide a thick, leather-bound document across the table toward her. "We are offering you a business proposition, Miss Iden," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "A marriage contract. 2 years minimum, with very specific terms. And considerable compensation." Kaylee's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. The numbers on the first page made her breath catch in her throat. It was an astronomical sum. Enough to cover her mother's treatment 10 times over. Enough to set them up for life, to erase every financial worry she had ever had. It was the kind of money that solved every problem she could imagine. Why me?" she managed to ask, proud that her voice remained steady, a small island of calm in the swirling chaos of her mind. Isel finally sat down, his movements graceful and deliberate despite his obvious fatigue. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, fixing her with that intense gaze. Because you're brilliant, but you're unknown. You have no public profile. Because your background check shows a history of absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty to your employers. And, he paused, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. Because you have a pressing, immediate need that we can solve, while you help us maintain stability during a crucial period of transition. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, pale but brave in her sterile hospital bed, trying to hide her pain behind a weak smile. The ever-present, crushing weight of the medical bills. The medical bills, she whispered, the words barely audible. All covered, Marcus confirmed, tapping a section in the document. In full, plus a substantial trust fund established for her future care, along with other benefits, detailed in Section 3. Kaylee forced herself to think, to be the analyst, to approach this like any other business proposition, stripping away the shocking, personal nature of it. And what, exactly, would be required of me? Public appearances as my wife, Isel stated, his tone all business again. Residence in my penthouse. Participation in social and corporate events relevant to the company. He paused, his expression hardening slightly, the shadows in his eyes deepening. And an heir, within the 2-year period. An heir. The clinical, detached term couldn't disguise the raw, intimate reality of what that meant. Kaylee felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression professional, her face an unreadable mask. The contract includes strict confidentiality clauses, Marcus added, his voice pulling her back to the legalities, and significant financial penalties for any breach of terms, particularly regarding business intelligence, or, he glanced at Isel, personal matters. Kaylee understood the unspoken reference, the betrayal of his ex-wife. The whole business world was rife with rumors, though the specifics had been kept surprisingly quiet, a testament to Isel Chosen's power. How long do I have to decide? She asked, her mind already calculating probabilities, weighing risks and rewards, trying to build a logical framework around an illogical choice. Until 5 p.m. today, Isel replied, standing up, the meeting clearly over from his perspective. I have a board meeting at 6 o'clock, where I need to present them with either a signed contract or a different solution. He moved to leave, then paused beside her chair. He was so close she could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like bergamot and cedar. She could see the faint shadow of stubble along his strong jaw. Miss Iden, he said, his voice lower now, almost gentle, a stark contrast to his public persona. I know this is overwhelming, but sometimes, the most life-changing opportunities come disguised as impossible choices. After they left, Kaylee sat alone in the vast, silent conference room, staring at the contract that lay before her like a Pandora's box. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the city in the bright, unforgiving light of morning. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis of glass and concrete was her mother's hospital, where monthly bills arrived with the relentless regularity of a terminal illness. Somewhere was her tiny, rented apartment, with its second-hand furniture and carefully planned budgets. And here, in this room, high above it all, was a chance to change everything. A chance to save her mother, to secure their future. The cost was only 2 years of her life. 2 years of playing a role. And her heart's independence. Little did she know, as she reached for the heavy, expensive pen with trembling fingers, that she was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about business, loyalty, and love. And that the man who had just left the room, carrying his own carefully guarded wounds, would become far more than just a name on a contract. The leather of the visitor's chair in Marcus Chen's office was cool and unyielding against Kaylee's back. It creaked softly as she shifted her weight, a sound that seemed deafening in the heavy, expectant silence of the room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky was transforming. The brilliant blue of the morning had deepened into a bruised, moody gray, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like a slow-moving army. The atmosphere in the room was a perfect mirror of the weather, tense, charged, and on the verge of breaking. The wall clock, a minimalist piece of art with no numbers, showed 4:30 p.m. 30 minutes remained until Isel Chosen's deadline. 30 minutes to finalize a decision that would rewrite the entire course of her life. For the past 6 hours, she had been methodically dissecting the document before her financial analyst's mind cataloging every clause, every subsection, every potential loophole and liability. She had approached it as she would any corporate merger, with cold logic and detached scrutiny, a mental fortress she had built to keep the overwhelming personal implications at bay. Section 7.3, she murmured, her own voice sounding foreign. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger, a manicure she'd gotten at a cheap salon, a small act of defiance to feel put together for this insane day, on the page. The infidelity clause. It seems severe. Marcus, seated opposite her, nodded, his expression a carefully neutral mask. He had been a paragon of patience all day, answering her questions with precision and without a hint of judgment. Total forfeiture of all compensation and assets by the guilty party, he recited, his tone as dry as the legal text itself. Plus a personal penalty of $50 million, payable to the aggrieved party within 90 days. He paused, his gaze briefly flickering towards the door as if expecting his boss to materialize. Mr. Chosen was quite insistent on this point. Of course, he was, Kaylee thought, a strange mix of pity and understanding coiling in her gut. She had spent her lunch break, a sad sandwich eaten at a desk in an empty office Marcus had provided, not eating, but researching. She devoured every article, every society column, every shred of gossip she could find on Adrian Reynolds Chosen, soon to be Adrian Hartford. The woman's social media presence painted a picture of calculated, ruthless ambition. Each post, each philanthropic endeavor, each seemingly candid photo was orchestrated to climb the rungs of the corporate and social ladder. Her lightning-fast engagement to James Hartford, announced mere days after the divorce filing became public, was the final, triumphant move in a long game. The $50 million penalty wasn't just a deterrent. It was the quantifiable price of Isel's pain. And the social media restrictions, Kaylee continued, turning a page, the thick, high-quality paper rustling under her touch. Section 8. It's comprehensive. All posts must be pre-approved by the Public Relations Department, Marcus confirmed, gesturing to a thick addendum that was a contract in itself. We provide guidelines for appropriate content, tone, and frequency. You'll be assigned a personal stylist, a social secretary, and a round-the-clock security detail. Everything from your wardrobe to your daily schedule will be coordinated to maintain the image of a proper Chosen Industries executive spouse. The goal is to present a narrative of stability, tradition, and seamless partnership. The image of a proper spouse. The words felt like a cage closing around her. Her life would no longer be a series of her own small, quiet choices. Which coffee shop to visit, whether to wear flats or heels, what book to read on the subway. It would be a performance, scripted and directed by a team of professionals. She swallowed, the reality of the golden handcuffs settling heavily upon her. Then there was Section 12, the section she had been avoiding, circling back to it time and again like a moth drawn to a terrifying flame. The door opened without a knock, and Isel Chosen entered. The atmosphere in the room immediately shifted, the air crackling with his presence. He had shed his suit jacket, and the sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, capable arms dusted with fine dark hair. Despite the casual adjustment to his attire, power radiated from him in palpable waves. He moved with a restless energy, a predator confined, as he took the seat beside her. The scent of bergamot and cedarwood filled the small space between them, an intimate and distracting invasion of her senses. "How are we progressing?" he asked, his deep voice carrying that hint of roughness she was beginning to recognize as chronic fatigue. His gaze wasn't on her, but on the gathering storm outside, his jaw tight. "Miss Iden has some concerns about Section 12, Marcus replied diplomatically. "Ah yes, Section 12, Isel said, finally turning his steel-gray eyes on her. The full force of his attention was unnerving. The air requirement. Kaylee felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, to hold it. This was a business negotiation. She would not be intimidated. "The timeline," she said, her voice commendably steady. "It seems aggressive. The board requires an heir, or at least the clear and imminent promise of one, Within the 2-year contractual period to secure my position, Isel stated, his tone flat and non-negotiable. It was a simple statement of fact. However, he continued, a flicker of something. Was it consideration? Or just shrewd pragmatism? In his eyes, I am willing to add a clause regarding full medical privacy and the establishment of personal comfort levels and boundaries to be respected at all times. Before she could process this unexpected concession, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, and the muscle in his jaw tightened visibly. Drake Morrison just bought another 2% of our shares through a shell company in the Caymans. He informed Marcus, his voice hardening. He's getting bolder. All the more reason to finalize this today, Marcus responded, his tone urgent. He slid another document forward, this one separate from the main contract. The marriage license application is ready. Once signed, we can have a private ceremony with a judge tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. The word hit Kaylee like a physical blow. Her heart, which had been beating a steady, controlled rhythm, began to race. Everything was moving too fast, a runaway train she had willingly boarded. She looked down at the contract, at section 15.4, divorce terms after contract completion. The settlement was beyond generous. It was life-altering. It would ensure that she and her mother would never want for anything, ever again. It was safety. It was freedom from fear. It was everything she had ever wanted, wrapped in a package she had never imagined. I have a counter-proposal, she said suddenly, the words leaving her lips before she had fully consciously formed them. The audacity of her own voice surprised her as much as it did the two men in the room. Both men turned to her, their expressions a study in contrasts. Marcus looked momentarily flustered, a crack in his professional facade. Isel's eyebrows rose slightly, a subtle but significant sign of surprise. Regarding, he prompted, his voice laced with a dangerous curiosity. Kaylee sat up straighter, pulling on every ounce of the professional confidence she had painstakingly developed over years of defending her analyses in boardrooms full of older, more experienced men. Regarding section 9.2, she said, her voice clear and firm. My role within the company. She met Isel's gaze directly. You're not just getting a wife, Mr. Chosen. You're not just hiring a surrogate. You're getting a financial analyst with specific, proven insights into Drake Morrison's operational tactics. I want to be more than a figurehead, more than window dressing. A strange expression crossed Isel's face. It was a look she couldn't decipher at first, but then she recognized it. It was something almost like respect. What, exactly, are you proposing? He asked, leaning forward slightly, his full attention now locked on her. I want full access to the company's financial data. Not just the surface-level reports given to the board, but deep analysis permissions. The raw data streams, the trading algorithms, the internal investment logs. If Morrison is planning something, if he has help from the inside, it will show in the numbers first. There will be patterns. She took a breath, pressing her advantage. You need someone who can spot those patterns when others might miss them. Someone whose loyalty is guaranteed by both contract and personal interest. Marcus began to object, a protest forming on his lips about security protocols and clearance levels, but Isel held up a hand, silencing him without a word. He continued to study her, his gray eyes intense, as if he were re-evaluating her, seeing her for the first time not as a solution to a problem, but as a strategic asset. And in return for this access, he asked, I'll sign everything else as is, Kaylee said, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Including the 2-year timeline in section 12. No more objections. Her voice remained firm, betraying none of her internal turmoil. But I want to actually help protect your company. My company, for the next 2 years. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, a punctuation mark to her declaration. Silence filled the office, thick and heavy. Isel stood and moved to the window, watching the approaching storm. His reflection in the dark glass was a pensive silhouette, his expression unreadable. At it, he said finally, his voice decisive. He turned back to her, his eyes glinting. Full analysis permissions. You'll have a secure terminal, direct access. You'll report directly to me. Weekly briefings, every Friday at 4 p.m. He took a step closer, the intensity of his gaze making her breath catch. But understand this, Miss Iden. If you sign these papers, your loyalty belongs to me and to this company. Completely. There is no middle ground. No gray area. I understand, she said, her voice a whisper that was somehow still firm. As Marcus began rapidly modifying the digital documents on his tablet, Isel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. His sister, Rain, was calling. "Rain?" He answered, his tone gentler than any she had heard from him. He moved to the corner of the office, turning his back for a semblance of privacy. "Shouldn't you be resting?" "Yes, the contract marriage is proceeding." "No, you can't meet her yet. Not until after the press conference." "I know it's fast, Rain. It has to be." Kaylee used the moment to study him. Despite his commanding presence, the signs of strain were evident in the tense set of his shoulders, the slight shadows under his eyes that even perfect lighting couldn't completely hide. This wasn't just business for him. It was a deeply personal war. Morrison's attempted takeover, coming so soon after Adrienne's betrayal, was an assault on everything his family had built, on his very identity. "Miss Iden," Marcus's voice drew her attention back. "The modifications are complete. Shall we proceed?" The next hour passed in a surreal blur of signatures and initials. Each page felt heavier than the last as Kaylee signed away her independence, her privacy, her future, in exchange for her mother's. Yet, as she watched Isel's strong, confident hand move across each document, his signature a bold, decisive slash of ink, she felt a strange sense of alignment. It felt less like she was giving up her freedom and more like she was stepping into something significant, a battle she was now equipped to fight alongside him. The final signatures were witnessed by Marcus and his assistant just as the storm broke. Rain lashed against the massive windows in violent, diagonal sheets, and a deafening crack of thunder shook the building. It felt like a celestial exclamation point on the deal they had just sealed. Isel stood, buttoning his suit jacket, all business once more. "The car will take you home to pack your essentials," he informed her, his voice formal. "The rest of your belongings will be moved to the penthouse tomorrow. The ceremony is at 9 a.m. in the penthouse. Small, private, just legal witnesses." "And after?" Kaylee asked, her mind struggling to process the sheer velocity of it all. In less than 24 hours, she would be Mrs. Isel chosen. "After, we have a press conference at noon to announce our marriage," he said. His lips curved in a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "And your appointment as a special financial analyst to the CEO's office. You did want to be more than window dressing, correct?" Before she could respond, his phone buzzed yet again. This time, his expression darkened as he read the message. "Morrison's called an emergency shareholders meeting for next week," he told Marcus, his voice tight. "He's making his move sooner than expected." "The marriage announcement should stabilize things," Marcus assured him. "Speaking of which, the ring." Isel reached into his pocket and removed a small, dark velvet box. Kaylee's heart, illogically, skipped a beat. He opened it. The diamond was stunning, an elegant, emerald-cut stone, flanked by intricate, Art Deco-inspired details on the platinum band. It was tasteful rather than flashy, sophisticated and somehow, impossibly, perfectly suited to her own aesthetic. "The family ring stays in the vault," he said quietly, his voice low enough for only her to hear as he took her hand. His touch was unexpectedly gentle, his fingers warm against her cold skin as he slid the ring onto her finger. "This one suited you better." The fact that he had chosen it specifically for her, that in their brief, high-stakes interactions he had noticed enough about her to select something so personal, sent an unfamiliar warmth blooming in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the contract. The ring fit perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered, and for a fleeting moment, something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes, before he quickly masked it. "The car is waiting," he said, stepping back, creating distance between them once more. "Marcus will send you the full schedule for tomorrow. Try to get some rest." The media circus begins at noon. As Kaylee gathered her things, her bag suddenly feeling flimsy and foreign in this new context, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the office. In that brief, stark moment, she caught Isel watching her with an unguarded expression, something like intense curiosity mixed with another emotion she couldn't quite name. Then, the thunder crashed, and the moment was gone. He was back to being the untouchable CEO, his attention already on his phone, likely handling the latest crisis Morrison had manufactured. In the elevator, Riding down from the heavens of corporate power, Kaylee studied her reflection. It was the same person, in the same slightly too big suit, wearing the same sensible glasses. But on her finger was a ring that cost more than her annual salary, and in her bag was a contract that would change her life forever. Her mother's voice from their brief, tearful phone conversation an hour ago echoed in her mind. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is take a leap of faith, honey. The elevator doors opened to reveal her new reality. Two discreet, but obviously capable men in dark suits, her new security detail, who would now be permanent fixtures in her life. As they escorted her to the waiting Mercedes, the rain soaking the city streets and blurring the lights into a watercolored dreamscape, Kaylee couldn't shake the feeling that she had just signed up for far more than a simple business arrangement. And little did she know that upstairs, Isel Chosen stood at his window, watching her car pull away into the storm. His expression was thoughtful as he absently twisted his own gold wedding band, a ring that would be replaced tomorrow with one that symbolized a very different kind of marriage. A marriage of convenience that, he was beginning to suspect, would soon become anything but convenient, as two hearts, carefully guarded behind contract clauses and business terminology, began their own unexpected, unwritten negotiations. The setting sun was a painter, daubing the western sky in fiery strokes of crimson and gold. The light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, stretching across the polished marble floors in long, dramatic streaks. Kaylee stood before the vast expanse of glass, watching the city below transform from a concrete and steel metropolis into a glittering constellation of man-made stars. She felt as though she were in a celestial observatory, looking down on a different universe. Her wedding dress, a sophisticated Vera Wang creation, rustled softly with each nervous breath she took. The PR team had chosen it for its appropriate balance of elegance and modesty, a phrase that had made her feel more like a corporate asset than a bride. It was a sheath of ivory silk, impossibly simple and devastatingly expensive, with a graceful cowl neck and a subtle train that pooled around her feet. She had to admit, they had chosen well. The dress made her look like someone she didn't recognize, poised, elegant, and serene. It was a beautiful lie. The day had been a whirlwind of calculated precision, executed with the meticulous planning of a military operation. The morning ceremony had been stark and swift. It had taken place in the penthouse's grand living area, a space that could have comfortably hosted 100 guests. But the attendees were few. Just Kaylee and Isel, Marcus Chun and his assistant as witnesses, and a somber judge who had officiated with a dispassionate air. The entire event, from the judge's arrival to the signing of the marriage certificate, had taken exactly 23 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no tearful family members. Just the low rumble of the city below and the scratch of pens on heavy paper, sealing their fates together. The press conference that followed was a masterclass in corporate communications and public relations theater. Isel, with Kaylee a silent, smiling prop at his side, had presented their marriage not as a sudden, inexplicable union, but as the natural, inevitable progression of a deep, private connection. He spoke of mutual respect, shared values, and a whirlwind romance they had deliberately kept shielded from the public eye. He was so convincing, so earnest, that for a fleeting moment, even Kaylee almost believed him. She had played her part perfectly, her gaze soft and adoring when she looked at him, her hand resting comfortably in his, her smile gentle and genuine. It was the performance of a lifetime. Now, 12 hours later, the performance was over, and the reality was setting in. She was Mrs. Kaylee Chosen. Social media was a wildfire of speculation, with financial bloggers and society columnists alike dissecting every detail of the Ice King's surprise wedding. Who was this mystery woman? Where had she come from? Was this true love, or the most strategic merger of Isel Chosen's career? Mrs. Chosen? The name, spoken aloud, still sounded foreign, like a title belonging to someone else. She turned to find Marina, the housekeeper, standing discreetly by the entrance to the master suite. Marina was a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence that was somehow comforting in this overwhelmingly opulent environment. Your evening preparations are complete, and Mr. Chosen will be arriving shortly. He just finished his conference call with the Tokyo office. Even their wedding night was scheduled around international business. A bitter, ironic smile touched Kaylee's lips. She smoothed down the silk of her dress, the fabric cool and slick beneath her trembling hands. "Thank you, Marina." The older woman's eyes softened with something that looked remarkably like sympathy before she gave a small, respectful nod and quietly withdrew, leaving Kaylee alone in the cavernous master bedroom. Alone again. The silence of the penthouse was immense, broken only by the whisper of the air conditioning. She moved into the en-suite bathroom, a space larger than her entire old apartment, all marble, glass, and gleaming chrome fixtures. Her reflection in the vast, brightly lit mirror showed a woman transformed. Her honey blonde hair, which her own hands could only manage to wrangle into a simple bun, now fell in soft, artful waves around her shoulders, courtesy of the stylist who had been dispatched that afternoon. Subtle, expert makeup enhanced her green eyes and gave her cheekbones a definition she didn't know she possessed. And her body was veiled in the ivory silk of the wedding dress, a sophisticated armor she was suddenly desperate to shed. The sound of the bedroom door opening, a soft, solid click, made her heart leap into her throat. She heard Isel's footsteps, confident and measured, on the plush carpeting. The subtle shift of fabric as he removed his suit jacket. The quiet, metallic clink of his cufflinks being placed on the polished surface of the dresser. He was here. Her husband. Kaylee. His deep voice, carrying through the bathroom door, was a low thrum that vibrated through her. He had started using her first name during the press conference, the syllables rolling off his tongue with a practiced, easy familiarity that belied the fact they had known each other for less than 48 hours. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she pushed open the bathroom door and stepped out. Isel stood by the window where she had been earlier, his tall frame silhouetted against the glittering tapestry of the city lights. He had loosened his tie, and the top two buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing a hint of the strong column of his throat. The jacket of his Tom Ford wedding suit was draped over a chair, and she noticed he had already removed his shoes, his stockinged feet a small, humanizing detail in this larger-than-life man. He seemed, for the first time, almost approachable. He turned to face her as she entered, his gaze sweeping over her. His words, when they came, were as businesslike as his conference call with Tokyo. The press coverage was favorable. The stock jumped 6 points after the announcement. "I saw," she replied, grateful for the familiar, safe territory of financial discussion. It was a language they both understood. Morrison's shell companies stopped purchasing shares around 2 p.m. The announcement had the desired stabilizing effect. He moved to the small, elegant wet bar in the corner of the room and retrieved a bottle of champagne from the cooler. "Celebrating our successful merger, then," he said, the hint of dry irony in his voice making her lips curve in a genuine, albeit nervous, smile. Something like that. He worked the cork out with a soft pop and poured 2 glasses, the pale gold liquid fizzing in the crystal flutes. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing for a brief, electric moment. The contact sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, a jolt of awareness that was purely physical. "You handled the press conference well," he observed, studying her over the rim of his glass, his steel gray eyes unreadable. "Even that question about Adrian." "Ah, yes." The ambush from the tenacious reporter from the Financial Chronicle. The woman had tried to provoke a reaction, her question dripping with insinuation. "How does it feel to follow in the footsteps of such a notorious predecessor?" Kaylee, drawing on some deep well of composure she didn't know she possessed, had smiled sweetly and replied that she preferred to focus on the future, not the past. The answer had earned her a quick, almost imperceptible nod of approval from Marcus. "The PR team's briefing was thorough," she said, taking a sip of the champagne. "The vintage was exquisite, of course, probably worth more than her old car." The bubbles tickled her nose and did little to steady her nerves. "They didn't tell you to look at me that way when you answered," Isel replied, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. "That was all you." Heat rose in her cheeks as she remembered the moment. She had instinctively turned to him, her expression of quiet, unwavering support for her new husband entirely genuine, a reflexive defense against the reporter's attack. Something had passed between them then, a silent, powerful current that had made the reporters lean forward in their seats, sensing a story far more compelling than a simple corporate marriage. He set his half-empty glass down and moved closer. The space between them shrank until he was standing directly in front of her. His height was formidable, forcing her to tip her head back to maintain eye contact. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, with the clinical terms of their contract, with the raw, undeniable chemistry that had been simmering beneath the surface since she first walked into his office. "We should discuss expectations," he said, his voice a low murmur. "For tonight." Her heart hammered against her ribs at his proximity. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the dark shadow of stubble along his jaw that his perfect shave from the morning had not entirely vanquished. He smelled of expensive cologne, clean linen, and something else, something uniquely him, a warm, masculine scent that was deeply unsettling to her carefully maintained composure. "The contract specified," she began, her voice barely a whisper, her throat suddenly dry. "The contract specified an heir within 2 years," he interrupted softly, his gaze intense. "It didn't specify rushing things on our wedding night, just to meet some archaic social expectation." Surprise, sharp and clear, cut through her nervousness. She blinked up at him, her mind struggling to reconcile this man with the ruthless CEO who had dictated the cold, hard terms of their agreement. "You don't want to?" "What I want," he said, and his hand came up, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking the soft skin just below her eye, "is to understand why you're trembling." The unexpected tenderness in his gesture, in his voice, undid her. All the walls she had so carefully constructed throughout the day, all the professional poise and emotional detachment, crumbled into dust. I've never," she swallowed, the words catching in her throat, thick with a vulnerability she hadn't intended to reveal. "This would be my first time." Understanding dawned in his eyes, a slow wave of revelation. It was followed by something else, something fierce and startlingly protective that made her breath catch in her chest. His thumb continued its gentle, hypnotic stroking of her cheekbone as he processed this new, critical piece of data. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper. "It wasn't relevant to the terms of the contract," she whispered back, unconsciously leaning into the warmth of his touch. It was the first gentle human contact she'd had all day. "And I didn't want you to think I was too inexperienced for the position." A sound, somewhere between a dark laugh and a pained groan, escaped him. "The position? Of my wife." His other hand came to rest on her waist, his fingers splayed against the silk of her dress, warm and solid. "Kaylee, this changes things." "It doesn't have to," she insisted, her own body betraying her by pressing closer to his warmth, seeking a comfort she hadn't realized she craved. "I understand what's required. I signed the contract." "Stop." His voice was rough now, his eyes intense as they searched hers. "You're not a business requirement. Not in this." He took a deep breath. "This part of our arrangement happens on your terms. When you're ready, and not a moment before." The profound gentleness beneath his gruff words made tears prick at the back of her eyes. She had steeled herself for cold efficiency, perhaps even a detached indifference. She had expected to be a means to an end. Instead, this powerful, wounded man, who had married her for the most cynical of business reasons, was treating her first time as something precious, something to be protected. "The board," she began, her mind clinging to the familiar logic of their agreement. "The heir. The board is not in this room," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a single tear that escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "Tonight, we sleep. Just sleep. And tomorrow, we begin learning each other. Properly." As if to demonstrate his intent, he lowered his head slowly, giving her ample time to pull away, to protest. When she didn't, when she stood frozen in a state of stunned disbelief, his lips brushed against hers. It was the barest whisper of a kiss, a feather-light touch, sweet and achingly undemanding. It asked for nothing and offered only reassurance. That gentleness was her undoing. Before she could stop herself, before her rational mind could scream a protest, her hands came up to grip the front of his shirt, her fingers bunching the fine fabric. She pressed closer, seeking more of that startling, tender connection. The kiss deepened in response to her silent plea, but he remained in careful control, his touch respectful even as a low groan rumbled in his chest. His arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against the hard planes of his body, and she could feel the rapid, heavy beat of his heart against her palms. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing heavily, the air thick with a new, more potent kind of tension. His eyes had darkened to the color of a storm cloud. "You're going to test my self-control, aren't you, Kaylee?" he murmured, his voice a rough, husky caress. The sound of her full name on his lips, spoken with such raw intimacy, sent a fresh wave of shivers through her. "I thought you didn't believe in tests anymore," she replied softly, referencing a comment he'd made during the press conference about their relationship being built on trust rather than trials. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, followed by what might have been a glint of admiration. "You're dangerous," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers, their shared breath warm in the small space between them. "Using my own words against me already." They stood like that for a long moment, simply breathing together, anchored in a reality that was suddenly far more complex than any contract could define. Slowly, reluctantly, he released her. "Go change," he said, his voice gentle but firm, re-establishing a sliver of distance. "Into something comfortable. I'll do the same. And then we'll talk. Really talk. Without contracts, or cameras, or expectations." In the bathroom, her legs feeling unsteady, Kaylee found that Marina had anticipated every need. Laid out on a marble bench were not only the delicate, expensive lingerie she had dreaded, but also a simple, elegant pair of silk pajamas. As she changed, she heard Isel moving around the bedroom, the domestic sounds, a drawer opening, the rustle of clothes, the soft thud of a shoe dropping, strangely, deeply comforting. When she emerged, he had changed into black lounge pants and a soft, gray t-shirt that clung to his broad shoulders and made him look younger, more approachable, less like the formidable CEO and more like a man. The massive bed had been turned down, the sheets a crisp, inviting white. He was sitting against the headboard, his legs stretched out on top of the covers. "Come here," he said simply, patting the empty space beside him. Kaylee hesitated for only a fraction of a second before joining him, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. To her surprise, he immediately closed the gap, pulling her closer, arranging her against his side with her head resting on his shoulder. His arm came around her, holding her securely. It should have felt awkward, but it felt right. "Better," he murmured, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Now, tell me about your mother's treatment. The real story, not the sanitized version in your background check." The unexpected question, asked with such genuine interest, broke down her remaining walls. And so, she found herself talking, her voice quiet in the dim light of the bedroom. She told him everything. The terrifying diagnosis, the experimental procedures, the hopeful days, and the soul-crushing setbacks. The lonely hours she'd spent in medical libraries and online forums, researching every new option. He listened intently, his hand absently stroking her hair, the gesture seemingly unconscious but deeply soothing. He asked occasional, insightful questions that showed he was truly processing her words, not just politely listening. "The contract's medical coverage will give her access to any treatment she needs, anywhere in the world," he said quietly when she had finished, her story hanging in the air between them. "I'll have Marcus expedite the paperwork tomorrow." Tears of gratitude pricked her eyes again. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic decency," he replied, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. "Now your turn. Ask me something. Anything you want to know about your new husband." She thought for a moment, nestled in the surprising comfort of his embrace. "Why did you really give me access to the company's financial data? The truth, not the business reason." His chest rose and fell with a deep breath. "Because when you proposed it, you looked alive," he said, his voice raw with an honesty that stunned her. "In a way you hadn't during all the contract discussions. Like you weren't just accepting a role, but claiming your place. It reminded me of myself at your age. Back when business was about the challenge, the thrill of the build, not just about power and protection." The vulnerability in his admission made her heart ache for him. For the idealistic young man, he must have been before betrayal had encased him in ice. Acting on pure instinct, she turned her face into his neck, pressing a soft, chaste kiss to his pulse point. His breath caught, and his arm tightened around her. Careful, he warned, though his voice held more amusement than censure. I'm trying to be a gentleman here. You're succeeding, she assured him, settling back against his shoulder. The exhaustion of the day was beginning to weigh on her, a heavy, welcome blanket. They talked for hours, the conversation drifting from his passion for restoring classic cars to her secret love of trashy romance novels. Somewhere around midnight, lulled by the sound of his voice and the steady rhythm of his breathing, her words began to slur. He insisted she take the en-suite bathroom first. When she returned, he had arranged the pillows and turned down the covers properly. Sleep, he said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead, a gesture so paternal and sweet it made her heart flutter. Lying in the massive bed, surrounded by a level of luxury she couldn't comprehend, she was comforted most by the simple, human sounds of running water and quiet movement from the bathroom. She had expected their wedding night to be a cold, contractual duty at best. Instead, she had discovered layers to Isel chosen that no financial report or news article could ever reveal. When he returned and slid under the covers beside her, she was already half asleep. His arm curved around her waist, drawing her back against his chest in a position that felt surprisingly, frighteningly natural. Rest, he murmured against her hair, his breath warm. I've got you. As she drifted off, lulled by the security of his embrace, Kaylee realized that somewhere between the signing of the contract and this moment, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about business anymore. In treating her virginity as something precious rather than an inconvenient complication, in showing genuine interest in her life and her dreams, Isel had revealed a capacity for tenderness that all his carefully constructed walls couldn't quite hide. And that, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, might be the most dangerous and most wonderful discovery of all. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since Kaylee Iden had become Kaylee Chosen. 3 weeks since she had stepped through the looking glass into a world of unimaginable wealth, intricate corporate politics, and a marriage that defied every definition she had ever known. Her life had bifurcated into 2 distinct, surreal streams. By day, she was the poised, elegant Mrs. Chosen, a quick study in the art of public appearances, her wardrobe curated, her schedule managed, her smile a permanent, pleasant fixture at galas and board luncheons. But by night, after the polite society masks were shed, she was Kaylee, the analyst. Her new office, a sleek, modern space she had been given on the executive floor, became her sanctuary and her war room. She had insisted on a space separate from Isel's, a small assertion of her professional independence, a boundary he had, to her surprise, respected without argument. Here, surrounded by the comforting blue glow of her monitors, she was in her element. The walls were covered in complex flowcharts and network diagrams, a visual representation of Drake Morrison's corporate empire, tracking his every move like a hunter tracking a formidable beast. Tonight, the beast was acting strangely. It was well past midnight, and the only light in her office came from the screens, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Something about Morrison's latest series of acquisitions nagged at her analytical mind. The pattern was off. It was too aggressive, yet too scattered. It lacked the surgical precision she had come to associate with his previous hostile takeovers. It felt desperate. Found something interesting? The voice, deep and familiar, startled her so much she physically jumped in her chair, her hand instinctively flying to her chest where her heart had just tried to leap out. She spun around to find Isel leaning against her doorframe, a silent shadow she hadn't heard approach. Even at this late hour, after what she knew had been a grueling day of back-to-back meetings, he looked impeccable in a tailored suit, though she noted the slight loosening of his tie and the top button of his shirt undone, small. Intimate signs of his own long day that she had come to recognize. Maybe, she breathed, her pulse slowly returning to a normal rhythm. She turned back to her main screen, pulling up a series of transactions. Look at Morrison's acquisition pattern over the last 72 hours. He's not just buying up shell companies to acquire our shares anymore. He's systematically targeting our supply chain partners. Isel moved into the room, his presence immediately filling the space. He came to stand behind her chair, his proximity a warm, solid reality that made her acutely aware of every breath she took. The subtle scent of his cologne, that clean, sharp mix of bergamot and cedarwood, mingled with the sterile air of the office, and it made her pulse quicken for an entirely different reason. She forced herself to focus on the data, on the cold, hard facts. Here, she said, pointing a finger at a particular cluster of transactions highlighted in red. 3 separate pharmaceutical research companies. All small, innovative labs. All acquired within the last week through different, newly formed shell corporations. And all 3 have exclusive research contracts with chosen industries. I know them, Isel said, his voice a low rumble just behind her ear. Innovent, Biogenics, and Pharmalytica. They handle our preliminary R&D for next-generation medications. Our legal team vetted them extensively. His hand came to rest on the back of her chair, his fingers just brushing the fabric near her shoulder. The casual touch was electric, a small point of contact that sent a jolt of warmth through her. But the timing, what about it? That's what's bothering me, she said, pulling up another set of data timelines, news articles, press releases. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced speed. Innovent was purchased 3 months ago. Biogenics, 4 months ago. Pharmalytica, nearly 6. They were all purchased before your divorce filing became public knowledge. Before anyone outside your inner circle knew your marriage was in trouble. She swiveled in her chair to look up at him, her green eyes wide with the implications. He knew, Isel. Morrison knew your marriage was failing long before the market did. He was positioning himself. Isel went very still behind her, the warmth of his presence suddenly feeling like a block of ice. The light from the monitors cast sharp, angular shadows on his face, making his expression unreadable but undeniably grim. Show me their research focus. She turned back to the screen, her heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt, the grim satisfaction of a theory being proven correct. And look at their primary research focus. It's all in the same field. She highlighted the project descriptions, the clinical trial applications, fertility treatments, advanced reproductive medicine, genetic enhancement and screening. Genetic enhancement? His voice was sharp. She pulled up more data, encrypted files she had spent days painstakingly decrypting. That's the most interesting part. And look at the funding sources for these acquisitions. She brought up complex financial webs, a spider's labyrinth of offshore accounts and layered holding companies. The money is being routed through a dozen different banks, mostly out of Singapore, but if you trace it all the way back, her fingers flew, collapsing the web into a single, originating point. It all leads to one holding company. Phoenix Global Investments. I've never heard of them, Isel said, his voice tight. You wouldn't have, Kaylee replied, a note of triumph in her voice. They were incorporated exactly 1 day after. She hesitated, the next piece of information feeling far too personal, a violation of a past that wasn't hers to uncover. After what, Kaylee? He prompted, his voice low and insistent. She took a deep breath. After your first public appearance with Adrian. Your first date at the Children's Charity Gala. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Isel straightened up, moving away from her chair to stare out her office window at the indifferent city lights. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken history. It wasn't chance, he said quietly, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was speaking more to himself than to her. Meeting her at that gala. The coincidental shared interests. The whirlwind romance. He turned to face her, his reflection a ghostly image in the dark glass. The entire relationship, the entire marriage, was possibly orchestrated from the very beginning. Kaylee stood, her own professional triumph turning to ash in her mouth. She was torn between the analytical satisfaction of solving the puzzle and the human empathy for the man whose life had been so cruelly manipulated. She wanted to go to him, to offer some word of comfort, but the distance he had suddenly put between them felt impassable. But Isel, there's more, she said, her voice soft. The pharmaceutical companies. They're all working on something collectively called Project Phoenix. And the preliminary research, she swallowed, the next words feeling obscene. It involves fertility enhancement drugs. He turned back to her sharply, his focus absolute. What kind of enhancement? The documents are heavily redacted, but I found fragmented references and internal memos. To guaranteed multiple birth rates. To enhance success probability factors. She met his eyes, the steel-gray depths now turbulent like a stormy sea. They were developing a way to guarantee twins. Or triplets. Understanding, horrifying and complete, dawned in his expression. It was followed by something darker, a cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. To ensure an heir, he said, the words precise and clipped. Quickly. To make any future marriage harder to dissolve. To tie the chosen wife, and by extension, her collaborators, to the company permanently through the unbreakable bond of children. Kaylee's analytical mind was racing ahead, connecting the final, horrifying dots. But why go to such elaborate, expensive lengths? Unless taking over Chosen Industries was only part of the plan, Isel finished for her, his voice grim. He moved back to her desk, his calm demeanor gone, replaced by a restless, caged energy. He leaned over her shoulder, studying the financial web she had mapped out on the screen. These research facilities, the drug development. They're using my company's resources, my supply chain, to build something bigger. As if on cue, a notification popped up on Kaylee's screen. Not a system alert, but an email from an unknown, untraceable sender. Her blood went cold as she read the subject line, a word of advice. Her hands trembling, she opened it. The message was short and chilling. Clever analysis, Mrs. Chosen. But some secrets are better left buried. Ask your husband about Project Phoenix. Or better yet, ask Adrian while you still can. Isel's hand gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh as he read the threat over her head. Before either of them could speak, before they could even process the violation, the massive, reinforced window of her office exploded inward. Time seemed to slow down. There was a deafening crash, a shower of glittering, razor-sharp glass spraying across her desk and her monitors. In the split second before her mind could even register what was happening, Isel reacted with primal, instinctive speed. He yanked her out of her chair, his arm a steel band around her waist, pulling her down to the floor and covering her body with his own as a brick, wrapped in what looked like a sheet of paper, landed with a heavy, sickening thud exactly where her head had been moments before. Security. Isel's voice was a sharp, guttural roar into the emergency comms on his watch. He didn't move from his position over her, his body a solid, protective shield. His hands, however, were surprisingly gentle as they moved over her, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did any of the glass hit you? I'm fine, she assured him, her voice a shaky whisper, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Adrenaline coursed through her, sharp and metallic. I'm okay. The brick had a note attached to it, held in place with a rubber band. Isel reached for it, his movements quick and angry. He unrolled it. The message was printed in stark, block letters. Next time, I won't miss. The office door burst open, and Marcus Chin rushed in, followed by a team of black-clad security personnel, their weapons drawn, their movements efficient and professional as they fanned out, securing the area. Isel didn't relinquish his hold on Kaylee, keeping her close, his arm a protective, unyielding presence around her waist as he helped her to her feet. Sweep the entire building, he ordered the head of security, his voice cold and lethal. I want every frame of security footage from the last 24 hours analyzed. And get that glass cleaned up. He looked down at Kaylee, his eyes scanning her face, his expression a mixture of fury and fierce concern. You're moving your office. Next to mine. Today. No arguments. She started to protest, to argue for her small pocket of independence, but the raw fear and concern in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't the CEO being protective of an asset. This was her husband, genuinely, terrifyingly afraid for her safety. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Okay, she agreed softly, letting him pull her closer, leaning into the solid strength of his body. Hours later, after the police reports had been filed, the security sweeps completed, and the shattered window temporarily boarded up, they sat in the silent sanctuary of Isel's penthouse office. The city lights glittered below, oblivious to the violence that had shattered their evening. Kaylee had changed into one of his spare shirts and a pair of sweatpants he'd had security retrieve from the bedroom. The expensive cotton fabric of the shirt swam on her small frame, but the faint scent of him that clung to it was strangely comforting. We need to talk about what you found, Isel said finally, breaking the long silence. He handed her a glass of wine he'd poured, his movements still tight with contained anger. All of it. She curled into the corner of a massive leather sofa, the wine glass cold in her hands, and watched him pace. He was like a panther in a cage, the controlled energy radiating from him almost suffocating. You think Morrison is working with someone inside Chosen Industries, she stated, not a question but a confirmation. Has to be, he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the second time that night. The timing of those acquisitions. The leak about the divorce. The specific knowledge of our security protocols tonight. He stopped pacing, his gaze sharp. It has to be someone high level. Someone with executive access. Someone who would know about, he hesitated. Project Phoenix, she suggested quietly. He stopped pacing and turned to look at her, his expression raw in the soft light of the office. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I never told anyone this, he said, his voice low. Not Marcus, not my father. But before Adrian left, she tried to convince me to invest in a new pharmaceutical research project. A joint venture. She said it would revolutionize the fertility industry. Let me guess, Kaylee whispered. The project name was Phoenix. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I refused. The research protocols seemed questionable, the ethics murky. It felt wrong. She was surprisingly, disproportionately angry about it. I chalked it up to frustrated ambition at the time. Kaylee's mind connected more dots, the puzzle pieces clicking into a horrifyingly clear picture. The shell companies, the research facilities, they needed your company's resources. Your distribution network, your political connections. When you wouldn't cooperate. They found another way in, he finished, his jaw clenching. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. Through you. She set down her wine, her own stomach churning. She turned to face him fully on the sofa. Isel, was our marriage part of their plan, too? His eyes snapped to hers, and something fierce and violently protective flared in their depths. No, he said, his voice an adamant growl. Finding you, choosing you, that was all me. They might have pushed me into a corner where a contract marriage seemed like the only option. But you, his hand came up, cupping her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle, almost reverent. You were never part of their scheme. You were the variable they couldn't control. The unexpected tenderness, the absolute conviction in his voice, made her heart race. How can you be sure? She whispered. Because, he said, his thumb stroking her cheekbone in a way that made her shiver, you're the analyst too brilliant to manipulate. The woman too genuine to corrupt. His voice roughened, became thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. The wife who made me feel something real for the first time in years. She leaned into his touch, all pretense of distance gone, unable to help herself. What do we do now? Now, he said, his other hand finding her waist, pulling her closer, we fight back. Together. No more playing defense. No more reacting to their moves. We find everything they're hiding. We expose every connection. We protect what's ours. What's ours? She whispered, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the heat in his eyes, of the way his thumb was now tracing the line of her lips. Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. It was unlike their previous kisses, the hesitant, gentle explorations of their wedding night. This one was deep and passionate, raw and possessive. It was full of the fear and fury of the night, the desperate need for connection in the face of chaos, and all the growing, unspoken feelings that had been simmering between them. When they finally parted, both of them breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Everything, he murmured, his voice a ragged whisper against her skin. The company. Our marriage. This thing growing between us that terrifies and thrills me in equal measure. She curled her fingers into the soft fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him. I thought this was just business for you. His laugh was a short, unsteady sound. It was supposed to be. Then you walked into my office with your brilliant mind and your pure heart, and suddenly, business was the last thing on my mind. A notification chimed on her tablet, which she'd brought from her office. The sound was an unwelcome intrusion, but it was a call back to the battle they now had to fight together. As they studied the new data she had uncovered about Project Phoenix, something had fundamentally shifted. His arm stayed around her waist. Her head rested naturally against his shoulder as they worked. They were no longer just CEO and analyst, or even contract husband and wife. They were partners. And as they worked together late into the night, a united front against the growing threats, Kaylee knew, with absolute certainty, that this alliance was no longer about fulfilling a contract. It was about protecting a connection that had become more valuable than any corporate empire. The attack came not with a brick through a window, but with the silent, insidious poison of digital ink. The headlines splashed across every major financial news outlet were a coordinated, surgical strike designed to inflict maximum damage. The chosen affair, intimate photos reveal CEO's ex-wife's betrayal. Beneath the lurid headlines were the photographs. Not the blurry, long-lens shots of a private investigator, but high-resolution, damningly clear images of Adrian with James Hartford. There they were, laughing intimately on a yacht in St. Bart's, the sun glinting off the diamond ring Hartford had given her. There they were, sharing a dessert in a ridiculously expensive Parisian restaurant, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. Each photo was time-stamped, dated months before the divorce filing, providing an undeniable timeline of her deceit. It was a public crucifixion, intended to paint Isel not as a powerful CEO, but as a fool, a cuckold, A man so emotionally compromised he couldn't possibly be fit to lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Kaylee stood in the pristine, quiet space of Isel's office, watching him scroll through the articles on his tablet. It had been 6 weeks since the attack on her office, 6 weeks since she had moved into the workspace adjoining his. 6 weeks of working side by side, of late nights fueled by coffee and shared determination, of a domestic intimacy that had blurred the lines of their contract until they were almost non-existent. In that time, she had learned to read the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of his distress. It wasn't in his words or his actions, but in the minute details, the slight, almost invisible tightening of the skin around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his jaw, the way his fingers would drum a silent, restless rhythm on any available surface. He was doing all three now. "They're trying to destabilize you before the emergency shareholders meeting," she said softly, her voice a quiet anchor in the storm of media speculation. She moved from her position by the window to perch on the edge of his massive desk, a familiar, comfortable proximity they had developed. "The timing is too perfect. This is a character assassination." Isel set down the tablet with a quiet click, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He rubbed his temples with the heels of his hands, a gesture of profound weariness. Morrison's work, no doubt. Though how he got his hands on these photos, they were from my PI's secure server. The access was heavily restricted. Actually, Kaylee interrupted gently, turning her own laptop on the desk to face him. "I don't think it was Morrison." Not directly. He leaned closer, his shoulder pressing against hers, a solid, reassuring weight. The casual intimacy of the contact, which would have sent her into a tailspin 6 weeks ago, now felt as natural as breathing. He studied the screen, his focus sharpening as he saw the lines of code and metadata she had pulled up. "Look at the metadata from the originally published images," she explained, her finger tracing a line of digital information. "The EXIF data was scrubbed, but I managed to recover fragments from the news site's cached versions. And look at the timestamps on the server logs." "The timestamps," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. His focus was now absolute. "These photos were downloaded from our own servers. Last night, at 2:17 a.m. By your own security team's protocols, the ones you hired to investigate Adrian in the first place," she confirmed, her own anger simmering on his behalf. "The photos were stored on a triple-encrypted, air-gapped server within Chosen Industries. The only way to access them would be from inside this building." His expression darkened, the steel in his eyes hardening to tungsten. "Another leak from inside." "But not just any leak," Kaylee pressed, pulling up another screen showing access logs she'd spent the morning unearthing. The access logs showed that the files were downloaded using executive-level credentials. "The user ID belongs to someone with C-suite clearance." She met his eyes. "Someone on your board is working with Morrison." Isel stood abruptly, the movement so sudden it made her flinch. He paced to the window, his back to her, presenting a rigid, unyielding silhouette against the bright morning light. The setting sun cast his profile in sharp relief as he stared out at the city, a kingdom he had built, now infested with traitors. "I trusted them," he said, his voice raw with a pain that went deeper than anger. "All of them. Richard, who was my father's first hire. Eleanor, my mentor. I put them on that board myself." The undisguised hurt in his voice made Kaylee's chest ache. The Ice King persona was gone, stripped away to reveal the wounded man beneath. Without hesitation, without a single thought for the invisible lines of their contract, she followed him. She slipped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against the fine wool of his suit jacket. It was a position of comfort they had found in the late-night hours of their work, a silent offering of support that had become their new language. His hands came up to cover hers, his fingers lacing through hers, squeezing gently. "When did you get so wise?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Around the same time you started letting me see behind your walls," she replied softly, her words muffled against his back. He turned in her embrace, his movements slow and deliberate. One hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking the soft skin just beneath her eye. His eyes, no longer steely, searched hers, filled with an intensity that made her breath catch, a potent cocktail of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something more vulnerable. "I'm beginning to think," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that this contract was the worst mistake of my life." Her heart stuttered, a painful, panicked beat. What? Had she overstepped? Had this intimacy, this partnership, been a breach of the unspoken terms? "It's limiting us," he explained, his thumb continuing its hypnotic, gentle stroking. "It's a cage. It makes me second-guess every feeling, every touch." It makes me wonder what's real and what's obligation. And what feels real right now, she whispered, her voice barely audible, hardly daring to breathe, her entire world narrowing to the space between them, to the warmth of his hand on her face. Instead of answering, he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't like their first, tentative kiss on their wedding night. It wasn't like the desperate, fear-fueled kiss after the attack. This was different. This was a kiss of profound, undeniable truth. It was deep and demanding, yet tender and searching. His arm banded around her waist, pulling her flush against the hard length of his body, while his other hand tangled in the soft hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head to deepen the angle. Kaylee melted into him, all thought, all analysis, all fear dissolving into pure sensation. Her hands clutched at his shirt, her knuckles white, as she opened to his kiss, meeting his passion with a raw, honest hunger of her own. All the unspoken attraction, all the simmering tenderness, all the shared moments of vulnerability that had been building between them for weeks, crystallized into this single, perfect moment of passion and truth. This was not obligation. This was not a contract. This was real. When they finally parted, both of them breathless and trembling, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. That, he said, his voice a rough, ragged whisper. That feels real. Before she could respond, before she could find her own voice in the overwhelming flood of emotion, his phone buzzed with an urgent, staccato vibration on the desk. The spell broke, and the harsh reality of their situation crashed back in. He moved to check it, his expression hardening as he read the message. Morrison's called an emergency press conference, he reported, his voice once again tight with strategic tension. In an hour. Kaylee was already moving, her own mind snapping back into focus. She slid off the desk and went to her laptop. He'll try to use the photos to challenge your leadership. He'll paint you as emotionally compromised, distracted, unfit to lead during a crisis. Let him try. Isel's voice held a dangerous, predatory edge she had never heard before. I'm done being reactive. I'm done playing defense. It's time we hit back. She looked up, catching the dangerous gleam in his eye. You have a plan. We have a plan, he corrected, moving back to her, his presence a powerful, reassuring force. He tilted her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. You found the connection between Morrison and Project Phoenix. You found the money trail. Now, we use it. The shareholders' meeting, she realized, her mind racing. If we can prove that Morrison knew about Adrian's betrayal months in advance, that he was funding her, we prove conspiracy. It's not just a personal scandal anymore. It's corporate espionage. Exactly, he nodded. But we need absolute, irrefutable proof. One misstep, one uncorroborated accusation, and we'll just look paranoid and desperate. We'll be playing right into their hands. Kaylee bit her lip, thinking. The Singapore shell companies, she said, an idea forming. The funding for Adrian's lifestyle, for the acquisitions, it had to come from somewhere. If I can trace the money trail back not just to Phoenix Global, but directly to a slush fund controlled by Hartford Global. Do it, he said, his voice urgent. He pressed a swift, hard kiss to her lips, a kiss that was a promise of battle. I'll handle Morrison's press conference. I'll deflect and control the narrative. You follow the money. Find me the gun, Kaylee. The smoking gun. She caught his arm as he turned to leave, a sudden thought striking her. Isel, the photos. All those articles. Are you okay? For the first time, a genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. I thought seeing them would hurt more, he admitted, his voice surprisingly soft. I thought it would feel like the betrayal all over again. But looking at her with Hartford, all I feel is gratitude. Gratitude. His hand cupped her cheek again, his gray eyes intense and sincere. Her betrayal led me to you. The simple, profound honesty of his words made her heart swell, a warm, expansive feeling that pushed out all the fear. This time, she initiated the kiss. She rose on her tiptoes, her hands framing his face, and pressed her lips to his. He responded immediately, his arms gathering her close for a moment that felt less like passion and more like a sacred promise. His phone buzzed again. It was Marcus, with preparations for the press conference. They separated reluctantly, though Isel's hand lingered on her waist for a moment longer. Be careful, he murmured, his forehead touching hers. Morrison's desperate now. That makes him dangerous. I will if you will, she countered, her hands automatically moving to straighten his tie, a small, intimate gesture that had become a part of their routine. His smile turned sharp, holding a predatory edge that sent a shiver down her spine. Oh, I'm counting on him underestimating me. Just like he underestimated my wife. The pride in his voice, the way he said, "my wife," made her stand straighter, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. As he left to prepare for the press conference, a warrior going into battle, Kaylee turned back to her laptop with a fierce, unwavering determination. She had to protect this man. This man who was becoming so much more than just her contract husband. She had earned that pride, and now she would prove she deserved it. Hours later, deep in a labyrinth of offshore accounts and encrypted transaction logs, she found it. The smoking gun. A series of wire transfers, cleverly disguised as consulting fees, moving from a subsidiary of Hartford Global directly into an account that had funded Adrienne's lavish lifestyle and, more damningly, had provided the seed money for Phoenix Global Investments. It was the irrefutable link. But it was the next document she uncovered, a hidden file within a file, that made her blood run cold. It was a research proposal for Project Phoenix, an early draft. And it wasn't just about a corporate takeover or fertility drugs. It was something much, much worse. The scope was global, the ethics non-existent, the potential for human suffering unimaginable. Her hand shook as she dialed Isel's secure, private number. "I found it," she said, her voice tight with horror, the moment he answered. "But Isel, it's bigger than we thought. So much bigger." "Come to the penthouse," he replied instantly, his voice sharp with concern. He must have heard the fear in her tone. "Don't stop for anything. Don't talk to anyone. I'm sending extra security for you now." She gathered her evidence, her mind racing as she headed for the elevator. The pieces were finally falling into place, revealing a conspiracy that went far beyond business rivalry, into a realm of pure, monstrous evil. In the penthouse, she found Isel pacing, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. The press conference had been brutal. Morrison had slung mud, implying instability and emotional turmoil at Chosen Industries. But Isel, as she saw from the clips online, had remained ice-cold, his responses calculated and controlled, projecting an aura of unshakable strength. The moment she entered, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly for a long, silent moment before stepping back to look at her findings. As she explained what she had discovered, laying out the horrifying scope of Project Phoenix, his expression grew increasingly grim. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the opulent room. "If you're right," he said finally, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "we're not just fighting for the company anymore. We're fighting for lives." "I'm right," she said, pulling up more documents on her tablet. "Look at the preliminary testing data. The off-the-books research facilities. The shell companies weren't just for buying shares. They were for hiding human trials." Isel studied the evidence, his brilliant, analytical mind processing the horrifying implications. "We'll need help," he said. "This is beyond corporate law. This is criminal." "I know someone," she offered hesitantly. "From college. She works for the FBI, the Financial Crimes Division." He nodded slowly, his mind already shifting to the new battlefront. "Make the call." He paused, his hands coming up to frame her face, his gaze fierce. "But Kaylee, this puts you in real danger. They already tried once. Maybe you should step back. Let me handle it from here." "Don't," she said, her hands covering his. "Don't you dare suggest I leave. We're in this together. That was the deal we made in this room." A powerful, protective emotion flashed in his eyes. Then he was kissing her again, hard and desperate, pouring all his fear for her, all his need for her, into the contact. When they parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Together," he agreed, his voice rough. "But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me." His voice broke on the last word. I can't lose you, too." The raw vulnerability in his voice, the admission of a fear he would never show to the world, made tears prick her eyes. "You won't," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood together at the penthouse windows, watching night fall over the city. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new dangers, a war fought on a much larger scale. But tonight, they held each other, drawing strength from a connection that had grown far beyond the sterile clauses of their careful contract, into something neither of them had expected, but both now cherished above all else. Neither of them spoke the word love. It was too soon, too new, too tangled with duty and obligation and danger. But as Isel's arms tightened around her, and as Kaylee leaned her head back against his solid, steady warmth, both of them felt it, growing between them, as powerful and inevitable as the sunrise. The morning sun, a brilliant, benevolent star, streamed through the penthouse windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. Kaylee stood before the full-length, antique mirror in their bedroom, studying her reflection with a sense of detached wonder. It had been a month since the attack, a month since the terrifying discovery of her pregnancy had been confirmed. At 12 weeks, her figure was still mostly unchanged to the outside world. But to her, the transformation was monumental. She swore she could see a new, gentle curve to her abdomen, a subtle swelling that held the most profound secret of her life. Her hand rested there instinctively, a constant, protective gesture. The past month had been a whirlwind of escalating conflict and deepening intimacy. The FBI, armed with the evidence Kaylee had uncovered, had begun conducting quiet, coordinated raids on Morrison's network of illegal production facilities. The media, fed a steady stream of controlled leaks by Marcus's PR team, was slowly turning its focus from Isel's personal life to the whispers of a massive corporate scandal involving Hartford Global. But the most significant changes had happened within the walls of the penthouse. Gone was the careful, almost imperceptible distance Isel had once maintained. The man who had once hesitated to touch her now seemed to need constant contact. His hand would find the small of her back as they walked into a meeting. His fingers would lace with hers under the polished surface of a conference table. Every night, his arms would pull her close as they slept, his body a warm, solid shield around hers. He had not only moved her office into the suite adjoining his, but had also insisted on personally overseeing the installation of state-of-the-art security features, turning their section of the executive floor into a veritable fortress. He was a man consumed by two powerful, intertwined missions, dismantling his enemies and protecting his family. "You're going to be late for the ultrasound." His voice, warm with an affection that still made her heart flutter, came from the doorway. She turned, a soft smile on her face, to find him watching her. He was leaning against the doorframe, already dressed for the day in a sharp, tailored suit, but his attention was solely on her. He was looking at her with that intense, focused expression that had become more frequent lately, a look of such profound wonder and tenderness it was as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, that this new life they had created was real. "Just thinking," she said softly as he crossed the room to her. His arm slipped around her from behind, his large hands covering hers where they rested on her stomach. He leaned his chin on her shoulder, their reflections captured together in the mirror, a powerful, united front. "About how different everything is from what we planned." She leaned back against his solid chest, the familiar scent of him enveloping her. "When I signed that contract?" "When you signed that contract," he interrupted gently, his voice a low rumble against her ear, "you saved me. You saved me from becoming exactly what they called me, the Ice King. Cold, untouchable, and hollow on the inside." His lips brushed her temple, a soft, reverent kiss. "Now look what you've done to me." She turned in his embrace, her hands coming up to straighten his tie, their familiar, intimate ritual. "And what have I done to you, Mr. Chosen?" she teased, her eyes sparkling. His own eyes darkened, the steel-gray depths softening as they searched hers. "You've made me hope again," he said, the simple, honest words carrying more weight than 1,000 romantic poems. Tears, sudden and surprising, pricked at her eyes. Damn pregnancy hormones, she thought, blinking them back furiously. Before she could respond, before she could tell him that he had done the same for her, his phone buzzed with a discreet message from his security chief. The car was ready. The drive to the private medical facility was quiet, but it was a comfortable, contented silence. They sat in the back of the armored sedan, their hands entwined, his thumb stroking absent-minded, soothing patterns on her skin. The world outside the tinted windows seemed distant and muted. The past month had brought major developments in the Project Phoenix case. The FBI had gathered irrefutable evidence of illegal chemical manufacturing, proof of Morrison's deep financial ties to Hartford Global, and, most damningly, a paper trail that led straight to James Hartford's private, offshore accounts. But Adrian, the architect of Isel's original pain, remained elusive. Her precise role in the deeper, more criminal aspects of the conspiracy was still unclear, shielded by layers of legal protection and plausible deniability. The thought of her, of the woman who had so callously manipulated the man beside her, made Kaylee's protective instincts flare. Her free hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, a silent vow to protect her child from the shadows of its father's past. Isel's grip on her hand tightened, as if he could sense the direction of her thoughts. "Stop worrying," he murmured, his voice a gentle command. "The FBI has Hartford under surveillance. Morrison's assets are being frozen as we speak. It's almost over." "I know," she sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I just can't help feeling like we're missing something. Like she's still out there, waiting." He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a warm, firm kiss to her knuckles. "Today is about our baby," he said, his voice firm but tender. Not about them. Let me give you that, at least. One day of peace. The sincerity in his voice, the raw desire to shield her from the ugliness of the world he inhabited, made her heart flutter. These moments of vulnerability from him, once so rare, were becoming more frequent, each one a precious gift she treasured. At the doctor's office, now a familiar place, their security team had already swept and secured the area. They were quickly and discreetly shown to a private maternity suite. As Kaylee changed into the standard paper gown, she tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking slightly. Something felt different today. A heightened sense of anticipation, mingled with a threat of anxiety she couldn't name. Isel helped her onto the exam table, his touch gentle but sure. When the cheerful, middle-aged ultrasound technician entered with the machine, his hand found hers immediately, his grip a solid, reassuring anchor. "All right, Mrs. Chosen." The technician, a woman named Linda, smiled warmly as she applied the cool gel to Kaylee's stomach. "Let's see how your little one is doing today." The room filled with the now familiar, whooshing sound of their baby's heartbeat, a rapid, powerful rhythm that was the most beautiful music Kaylee had ever heard. She squeezed Isel's hand, a shared smile of pure joy passing between them. But then, Linda's cheerful expression shifted. Her eyes widened slightly as she moved the wand across Kaylee's abdomen, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Oh," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Well now, this certainly explains why your hormone levels were so high on your last blood test." A cold spike of fear shot through Kaylee. Her heart, which had been soaring, plummeted. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, dear," the technician assured her quickly, her smile returning, wider and more brilliant than before. "In fact, everything is doubly right." She paused for dramatic effect. "But listen carefully." They did. And there it was. Underneath the primary, dominant heartbeat, there was another, fainter rhythm, a counterpoint to the first, slightly out of sync but just as strong. Not one heartbeat, but two. "Twins," the technician announced, her voice filled with a genuine delight that was infectious. She turned the screen so they could see it more clearly, pointing with a pin. "Two healthy babies. See? There's baby A, and right here is baby B. Both right on track for development." Kaylee's free hand flew to her mouth, a sob of pure, overwhelming shock and joy escaping her. Tears, hot and unrestrained, spilled down her cheeks. Twins. Two babies. Beside her, Isel had gone completely, utterly still. He was staring at the screen, at the two tiny, flickering shapes, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "Twins." His voice was a rough, strangled whisper. "You're sure?" "Absolutely sure," Linda beamed, turning up the volume so the dual heartbeats filled the room, a miraculous, syncopated duet. Two tiny hearts, beating strong and fast. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Chosen. It looks like you're having twin boys." "Boys. Two of them." Kaylee looked up at Isel, and what she saw on his face stole her breath away. The Ice King, the formidable CEO, the man who faced down corporate raiders and betrayals without flinching, was staring at the ultrasound screen with an expression of pure, unguarded, childlike wonder. His hand, the one holding hers, was trembling. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His eyes were bright, glassy with unshed tears. "I need a moment." He stood up abruptly and walked quickly out of the room, leaving Kaylee in a state of concerned bewilderment. But the technician just smiled knowingly. "Don't you worry, honey," she said, patting Kaylee's arm. "Dads often need a minute when they find out about twins. It's a lot to take in. Overwhelming in the best possible way." When Isel returned a few minutes later, his eyes were still suspiciously bright, but his smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. He moved immediately to Kaylee's side, leaning down to press a fierce, emotional kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick. "For everything." The drive home was filled with a new kind of silence. It wasn't tense or comfortable, it was buzzing, electric with a joy so immense it felt tangible. Isel's hand rested on her stomach the entire time, as if he couldn't quite believe their miracle had doubled, as if he could feel the two tiny lives pulsing within her. In the private elevator, gliding silently up to their penthouse, he finally spoke. His voice was serious, his expression sober, and Kaylee's heart skipped a beat. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Instead of answering, he guided her not to the bedroom, but to the living room couch, sitting her down and taking a seat close beside her, their knees touching. He took both of her hands in his. "When I had Marcus draw up our marriage contract," he began slowly, his gaze fixed on their joined hands, I thought I was being clever. I thought I was protecting myself, creating a safe, controlled, emotionless way to meet the board's requirements while keeping my heart locked away in a vault where no one could ever touch it again. She waited, her heart aching for the wounded man he had been, offering silent support as he gathered his thoughts. He lifted their joined hands to his chest, pressing them over his heart. "But you," he said, finally looking up, his steel-gray eyes intense and vulnerable. "You didn't just meet the requirements of the contract. You didn't just give me an heir, now 2 heirs." He broke off, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer contain. "You gave me back my ability to feel, to trust, to—" Kaylee felt her own tears building again as she understood what he was fighting to say. She finished it for him, her voice a soft, certain whisper. "To love." His eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw everything he had kept hidden for so long. "Yes," he admitted, the word a soft, profound exhalation of truth. "I love you, Kaylee. Not because of the contract. Not because of the babies. But because you walked into my life with your brilliant mind and your pure heart, and you made me whole again." A joy so bright and powerful it felt like sunshine burst in her chest, chasing away every last shadow of doubt and fear. "I love you, too," she said, her voice thick with happy tears. "So much." He pulled her into his lap then, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was a celebration, a confirmation, a vow. It was filled with a passion that made her head spin, a deep, soul-shaking tenderness that was a testament to the love they had found against all odds. When they parted, both of them breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. She laughed softly, a sound of pure happiness. "We are married." "No," he said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes, his expression serious and sincere. "Marry me for real. No contracts. No business arrangements. No clauses or conditions." He brought his hand to her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "Just us. Our boys. And love." "Yes," she whispered, the happy tears finally falling freely. "Yes. To all of it." He kissed her again, a kiss that sealed their new promise, tender and fierce all at once. The perfect moment was interrupted by the urgent, insistent buzz of his phone. Reality, as it always did, crashed back in. It was a secure message from the FBI. They had found something in Hartford's newly seized files, something that directly implicated Adrian. The battle wasn't over yet. But everything was different now. They weren't just fighting for a company or for justice anymore. They were fighting for their family's future. For their son's future. Isel's expression hardened as he read the message, but his touch remained gentle on her stomach. "We end this," he said, his voice firm with a new, unshakable resolve. "All of it. Then we focus on what matters. You and our boys." Kaylee covered his hands with hers, feeling the strength of his love, their love, surrounding her like a shield. "Together," she said. "Always," he promised, and sealed it with one last kiss that felt, for the first time, like coming home. Later that night, as they lay in bed, his hands protectively cradling her stomach, where their 2 tiny sons grew strong, Kaylee realized that their strange, transactional marriage had given them something no legal document could have ever predicted. It had given them a love story. A story written not in flowery prose, but in board meetings and business deals, in quiet moments of shared vulnerability and fierce, united battles. A story written in twin heartbeats and the promise of forever. And somewhere across town, unbeknownst to them, Adrian Hartford, cornered and desperate, was making plans of her own. Plans that would test that newfound love, and the family it had created, to its very limits. The first warning was silent, a ghostly premonition in a world of digital sentinels. It was a slight, almost imperceptible flicker in the cascading green code of the penthouse's primary security monitors at 2:43 a.m. In their bedroom, a sanctuary of muted grays and soft linens, Kaylee stirred from a light, restless sleep. One hand, as was now its constant habit, rested protectively over her 16-week pregnant belly, where their twin boys, their tiny, miraculous sons, grew stronger each day. Her analyst instincts, honed by months of watching for the subtlest anomalies in market data, registered the abnormality even before the alarms were triggered. It was a digital hiccup, a stutter in the system's otherwise flawless rhythm. It was wrong. "Isel," she whispered, her voice a soft tendril of sound in the darkness. She reached for her husband, for the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. The bed beside her was empty, but the sheets were still warm. He'd been working late again, consumed by the final stages of the Project Phoenix investigation, poring over encrypted files in his study, determined to personally oversee the dismantling of the conspiracy that had threatened to ruin him. As if summoned by her unease, the digital world screened. The sleek, integrated security panel by their bedroom door flashed a sudden, glaring red. The words scrolled across the small screen in stark, block letters, breach detected. Server room level. Simultaneously, her tablet on the nightstand lit up, a beacon in the darkness, alive with a cascade of urgent alerts. Firewall breaches. Security protocols failing in a domino-like sequence. Emergency systems activating throughout the building, their digital handshakes failing one by one. This wasn't a random hack. This wasn't a lone wolf trying to prove their skill. This was a sophisticated, coordinated, military-grade assault. The bedroom door swung open, and Kaylee tensed, her body coiling like a spring, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was Isel's familiar, powerful silhouette that filled the doorway. Even in the midst of a crisis, he moved with a controlled, economic precision. He was already changed from the comfortable sleep clothes he wore to bed, now dressed in a dark, practical turtleneck and tactical pants she had never seen before. The transformation from devoted husband to lethal protector was instantaneous and terrifying. "Stay calm," he said, his voice a low, steady command that cut through her rising panic. He moved swiftly to the wall safe, hidden behind a large, framed photograph of them on their wedding day, a posed, public lie that now concealed the tools for a very private, brutal truth. Security teams are mobilizing, but someone's disabled the elevator protocols in the primary comms. They're coming up the emergency stairs. "The Project Phoenix files," she asked, her own mind snapping into analytical mode, already knowing the answer. "That's what they're after. They're being accessed directly from our internal servers as we speak," he confirmed, his back to her as he entered the code for the safe. The heavy door swung open with a soft hiss. He removed a sleek, black handgun and what looked like a lightweight, Kevlar body armor vest. They're not just stealing the data. They're erasing their tracks. Kaylee's mind raced, out of the bed in a single, fluid motion. She moved to her own dresser, pulling on practical, dark clothing, her hands moving with a speed born of adrenaline. She watched as Isel positioned himself, almost unconsciously, between her and the massive windows, his body a shield. After last week's ultrasound, after the confirmation of their twin sons, his protective instincts, already formidable, had intensified into an almost suffocating, ever-present vigilance. "Marcus is 5 minutes out with tactical support," he reported, glancing at a specialized, encrypted app on his phone. "He's bringing a private team, but we're not waiting for them." He handed her a smaller, lighter vest. "Put this on. The panic room is in my office. It's fully shielded." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm, surprising even herself. She moved to her laptop, her fingers already flying, her mind racing through system architecture. "The server room first. I installed a secondary, ghost backup system after the brick incident. It's off-network. If I can't stop them from erasing the main files, I can at least trigger a full data dump to the off-site location." Suddenly, the lights died. The entire penthouse was plunged into an inky, absolute darkness, broken only by the thin, eerie strips of emergency lighting that activated along the baseboards. In the sudden, profound silence, they could hear a new sound, the grinding, protesting groan of the elevator machinery coming to a halt far below. "They've cut main power," Isel said, his voice a grim whisper in the dark. "Auxiliary systems will kick in 10 seconds. Kaylee counted down in her head, using the glow from her laptop screen to gather essential hard drives and tablets into a go-bag. 8, 7, 6. At 3, her personal email pinged with a new message. An encrypted message, but the sender ID was chillingly familiar. H. The message preview was a venomous whisper of text that made her blood run cold. "Did you really think those twins were natural, darling? Check the Project Phoenix fertility enhancement data. The original research notes. Time to see what our little formula can really do." Understanding, a horrifying, visceral blow, hit her like a physical impact. The twins. The drugs. Project Phoenix. She gasped, her hand pressing hard against her stomach, where, as if sensing her distress, their sons moved restlessly. "They engineered it," she breathed, the words a horrified whisper. "Our babies." "No." Isel's voice was a fierce, protective growl in the darkness. He was instantly at her side, his arm a steel band around her, pulling her close. "They're our boys. Nothing they did changes that. Nothing." Footsteps. In the hallway outside their suite. Multiple sets. Heavy, booted footsteps, moving with a practiced, military precision. "The office," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. "Now." They moved like shadows through the dark corridors of the penthouse, a home that now felt alien and threatening. The emergency lighting cast everything in eerie, blood-red shadows, turning familiar sculptures and paintings into monstrous shapes. Isel's hand was a steady, constant pressure on her lower back, guiding her, guarding her. Just as they reached the double doors of his office, the massive window at the far end of the hall exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered frame. Black-clad figures, rappelling down from the roof, swung through the gaping hole, weapons raised, laser sights cutting red, surgical lines through the darkness. "Get down." Isel shoved her through the office doorway as the first shots rang out, bullets sparking like angry fireflies off the marble wall where they had just been standing. She rolled instinctively, a move born of watching too many action movies, her arms wrapping around her stomach to protect her precious cargo as she scrambled for cover behind his massive, mahogany desk, a desk that had once symbolized his power, and was now, hopefully, a shield against it. More windows shattered. They were being breached from multiple sides, a coordinated, inescapable assault. Through the cacophony of breaking glass and splintered wood, she heard the controlled, sharp report of Isel's handgun, returning fire, covering her position. The sounds echoed strangely in the cavernous office, punctuated by shouted commands in a language she didn't recognize and the sickening crunch of boots on broken glass. "Quite a security system you've installed, Chosen." The voice, amplified and chillingly familiar, cut through the noise. Drake Morrison stepped through the ruined frame of the main office window, flanked by two more armed men. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was smiling, a cold, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes, which glittered with manic triumph in the emergency lights. "Stay behind me," Isel ordered, his voice low and calm as he positioned himself between Kaylee's hiding place and the intruders. His voice then dropped, turning arctic as he addressed Morrison. "You're under federal investigation. Your assets are frozen. What's left to gain from this madness?" "Everything," Morrison's smile widened. "The FBI is Hartford. Yes. They've frozen our visible assets. But Project Phoenix," he gestured to the armed men surrounding them, a silent army in their home. "This is just the beginning." "The fertility drugs," Kaylee said, her voice clear and strong from behind the desk. Her analytical mind, a fortress of logic, was still working despite the terror flooding her veins. "You were testing the compounds." Morrison's eyes, cold and reptilian, fixed on her position, on the slight curve of her stomach that was now visible. Isel tensed, his entire body becoming a rigid line of defensive fury. "Among other things," Morrison replied, his gaze lingering on her belly in a way that made her skin crawl. "Though I must say, Mrs. Chosen, you proved to be a more successful test subject than we ever anticipated. Twins on the first try. Rather impressive results." Pure, unadulterated rage flashed across Isel's face. It was a terrifying sight. His gun, held in a steady, two-handed grip, never wavered from Morrison's chest, but Kaylee felt his other hand reach back, his fingers brushing against her, a silent check to ensure she was still safe behind him. "If you have hurt them," he growled, each word a low, promising vibration of violence. "Oh, the drugs are perfectly harmless," Morrison assured them with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Perfectly engineered to increase the probability of multiple births without any significant side effects. Your sons are fine." His smile turned predatory, a shark scenting blood. For now, the threat hung in the air, thick and heavy. Kaylee's mind raced, processing variables, calculating odds, searching for an escape route, a tactical advantage. She remembered the ghost backup servers, the hidden data trails, the terabytes of evidence she had painstakingly compiled over the past few months. All they needed was time. Just a few more minutes for Marcus's team to arrive. Her hand found Isel's back, pressing twice against the top muscle. It was a silent signal they had developed over long nights in the boardroom, a nonverbal communication for, "I have a plan, follow my lead." His slight, almost imperceptible nod was a confirmation that would have been invisible to anyone else. She had to keep Morrison talking. "Why?" she asked, her voice projecting a calm she did not feel. "Why this elaborate, insane scheme? Why not just a standard hostile takeover?" "Because normal methods don't work on him," Morrison said, nodding his head at Isel with a grudging respect. "The Ice King. Untouchable and unbeatable in business. But everyone has a weakness." His, he smirked, was supposed to be Adrian. "Until she proved less useful than anticipated. She was working with you from the very beginning," Isel realized, his voice hard as granite. "Our entire marriage was a setup." "She had ambitions that went far beyond being a CEO's wife," Morrison agreed, clearly enjoying the dramatic confession. Though I must say, her replacement has exceeded all expectations. His eyes fixed on Kaylee again, a cold, appraising look. You've done what she couldn't. You've given him an heir. You've earned his trust. You've made him vulnerable. You're wrong, Kaylee said quietly, her voice ringing with a conviction she felt in her very bones. Her free hand found Isel's back again, a silent reassurance. Love isn't a weakness. Morrison laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. No? Then why is the great Isel chosen standing here with a gun he won't fire? Because he's terrified a stray bullet might hit his precious, pregnant wife and his unborn sons. He's not firing. Isel's voice turned deadly soft, the quiet before a hurricane, because he's waiting for his wife's signal. Kaylee squeezed his back twice. Confirmation. In one fluid, synchronized motion, she dropped and rolled to her right, away from the line of fire. Simultaneously, Isel fired. The shot was precise, a single, deafening crack that echoed through the room. It hit Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain and surprise. At that exact moment, as if triggered by the gunshot, the penthouse's sprinkler system activated. A sudden, torrential deluge of water rained down from the ceiling, soaking everything, causing chaos and confusion among Morrison's men. Through the downpour, she heard new sounds, the crash of breaching charges from multiple entry points. Marcus Chen's tactical team was here. Their coordinated, professional assault took Morrison's surprised and disoriented men down with brutal efficiency. Kaylee. Isel's hands found her in the disorienting, watery chaos, pulling her up and against his drenched body. Are you hurt? We're okay, she assured him, gasping for breath, guiding his hand to her stomach, where their sons were kicking vigorously, agitated by the excitement. All of us. His arms tightened around her, one hand spanning her belly protectively, a possessive, grounding claim, while the other kept his weapon trained on the scene as FBI agents, who had come in with Marcus's team, swarmed the room, securing a wounded and cursing Morrison. I thought. His voice was rough with emotion, his face buried in her wet hair. When I saw them threatening you and our boys. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. You protected us. Like you always do. His eyes, fierce and intense even through the falling water, searched hers. I love you, he said, the words of fierce, desperate confession, stripped of all artifice by the night's terror. Contract or no contract. Manipulation or no manipulation. What I feel for you. What we have. It's real. I know, she whispered, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him softly, a beacon of tenderness in the midst of the wreckage. I've always known. One of the twins kicked, a particularly hard, definitive thump against her side, making them both laugh, a wet, gasping sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Even in the chaos, their sons were there, reminding them of what really mattered. Marcus approached, looking apologetic despite his tactical gear and the grim efficiency of his team. Building is secure. We found the server room team a Hartford's personal security. They were trying to wipe the servers. Trying? Kaylee asked, a hopeful note in her voice. Marcus's grim expression broke into a tired smile. Your off-site ghost backups proved very useful, Mrs. Chosen. The FBI has everything they need now. Every file. He glanced at Isel. And Adrian? In custody as of 10 minutes ago, an FBI agent interjected. Picked her up trying to board a private jet to Singapore at a regional airport. Relief, so powerful it was a physical force, made Kaylee's knees weak. It was over. Finally, truly over. Take me home, she whispered to Isel, her head resting wearily on his chest. Not here. The house in the Hamptons. I want peace for a while. For them. He pressed a fierce kiss to her temple, his arms a fortress around her. Anything you want. You and our boys, you're all that matters now. Later, in the secure, silent cocoon of an SUV heading east out of the city, Kaylee curled into Isel's side. His hand rested protectively over their sons, who had finally settled after the night's excitement. They're calm now, she murmured. Fighting spirit, he said softly, his voice filled with pride. Like their mother. She looked up at him, studying his beloved face in the fleeting glow of the passing streetlights. Does it bother you? She asked quietly. That they used those drugs on us? That this was part of their plan? No, his answer was immediate and firm. He met her gaze, his eyes clear and certain. They may have engineered the timing. They may have manipulated the circumstances. But these boys are ours. Every kick, every heartbeat, every moment of joy they've brought us. That's real. That's ours. And nothing they did can ever taint that. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in soft, hopeful shades of pink and orange, Kaylee felt their suns move again, a gentle, peaceful flutter. Whatever Morrison and Adrian had planned with their monstrous schemes and their fertility drugs, they had failed in one crucial, fundamental way. Love couldn't be engineered. It couldn't be controlled or used as a weapon. Real love, like the kind growing between them and their unborn sons, could only be chosen, cherished, and protected. And in that, they had already won. The house in the Hamptons waited ahead, promising sanctuary and peace. Behind them, the FBI was unraveling the full, horrifying scope of Project Phoenix. But in that moment, with Isel's arms around her and their boys safe beneath her heart, Kaylee knew the real victory had nothing to do with business or revenge. They had fought for this love, chosen it in the face of manipulation and danger. Their sons might have been conceived in conspiracy, but they would be born into a family forged by something stronger than any contract, a love that had transformed both ice and fear into an unshakable, unbreakable trust. And that was a victory worth all the battles it had taken to win it. The Hamptons estate was a world away from the cold, sharp edges of the city. Here, the air was soft, salty from the nearby ocean, and filled with the gentle sounds of rustling leaves and distant seagulls. The sprawling, shingle-style house, which had once been just another property in Isel's vast portfolio, had become a true home, a sanctuary. It was bathed in the pale, delicate light of early morning when Kaylee's water broke. It happened 3 weeks before her due date. She had been in the garden, a lush, vibrant explosion of roses and hydrangeas that had become her favorite place on the estate. The peace they had found here over the past 3 months had been a healing balm on their souls. While Isel, true to his nature, still worked with relentless focus, he did so remotely, having transformed a sun-drenched library into a state-of-the-art home office. He had refused to be more than a few rooms away from her, his protective instincts now a gentle but constant presence in their lives. She was admiring a particularly defiant, deep crimson rose when the first, warm gush came, followed by a low, insistent cramp in her back. Her hand went to her prominent, round belly, cradling it. Their sons had been particularly active all morning, a series of energetic thumps and rolls that she had found endearing. She should have recognized it as a sign, a prelude to their grand entrance. "Isel," she called out, her voice calm, surprisingly steady. One hand braced against a weathered rose trellis for support. He appeared almost instantly, as if he had been watching her from his office window, his senses preternaturally attuned to her. He was halfway across the manicured lawn before she could call his name again. He was dressed in casual linen trousers and a soft cotton shirt, the CEO replaced by the expectant father. One look at her face, at the way she was breathing, and he was moving with a swift, sure-footed purpose. "Now," he asked, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and raw panic as he reached her, his strong arms immediately supporting her weight. She nodded, managing a weak smile despite the first real contraction that was beginning to build, a powerful, tightening wave. "Your sons," she breathed, "are apparently as impatient as their father." His laugh was a shaky, incredulous sound as he carefully guided her back toward the house. Everything was prepared. The past 3 months, under the watchful eye of a very concerned and meticulous Marcus Chun, had been a masterclass in preparation. Hospital bags were packed and waiting by the door. Security protocols were in place. Their private medical team, hired after the penthouse confrontation, was on permanent standby at a nearby, state-of-the-art medical facility that Isel had essentially bought for the occasion. After the horrors they had faced, they were leaving nothing to chance. "Marcus," Isel spoke into his phone, his voice a calm command even as he supported Kaylee's full weight. "It's time. Initiate Protocol Alpha." He didn't need to say more. The drive to the private medical facility was a surreal blur. The world outside the armored SUV's windows, the quaint village shops, the picturesque coastline, seemed to slide by in a haze. Kaylee's world had shrunk to the rhythm of her own body, the powerful, cresting waves of the contractions and Isel's steady, grounding presence beside her. He never once let go of her hand. With his other hand, he was a whirlwind of calm efficiency, coordinating with security teams and medical staff on his phone, his voice a low, authoritative murmur. "I've got you," he murmured repeatedly, his mantra a soothing balm against her pain. He pressed soft, reassuring kisses to her knuckles between contractions. "You're doing so well, my love." so strong. Despite the pain, which was growing in intensity with each passing minute, Kaylee couldn't help but smile at the endearment. My love. The Ice King had melted so completely, so thoroughly, that in these past months he had shown her a depth of tenderness that still, after everything, took her breath away. He was a man reborn, remade by love. The medical facility was already locked down when they arrived, a quiet fortress of healing. Discreet but formidable security teams were visible at every entrance. Their FBI liaison, a stern but fair man named Agent Davies, had insisted on maintaining a full protection detail until Morrison and Adrienne's trials were officially concluded. Mrs. Chosen, a calm, silver-haired woman in scrubs, greeted them the moment they entered the private maternity suite. It was Dr. Reynolds, the best neonatologist on the East Coast, whom Isel had headhunted and hired personally. Welcome. Let's check on these boys of yours. The next few hours passed in a haze of beeping monitors, hushed medical jargon, and the careful, professional ministrations of the nursing staff. Through it all, Isel was her rock. He never left her side. He was a study in contrasts. One moment a fierce, protective lion, his voice sharp and demanding as he spoke to security or questioned a medical procedure. The next an incredibly gentle, tender partner, his full attention focused solely on her. He held her hand, wiped her brow with a cool cloth, and breathed with her through every agonizing contraction. Talk to me. Kaylee gasped during a particularly strong, relentless wave of pain. The room seemed to tilt, the pain a white-hot nova at the center of her being. Distract me, please. He immediately pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, his other hand still gripping hers, a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Do you remember, he began, his voice a low, hypnotic story. Our first morning here in the Hamptons? After everything with Morrison. She nodded, clinging to the sound of his voice, focusing on it, letting it pull her away from the pain. You were standing on the beach at sunrise, he continued softly, his eyes fixed on her face. You were wearing my shirt over your swimsuit, and the wind was blowing your hair. Your hand was on your stomach, and you were looking out at the ocean with this look of such profound peace on your face. He paused, his own voice thick with emotion. That's when I knew. Knew what? She managed to ask between ragged breaths. That I wanted to spend every sunrise for the rest of my life with you, he said, his voice raw with a sincerity that pierced through her pain. Not because of the contract, not because of the babies, but because you make every single moment better just by being in it. You brought color back into my world, Kaylee. Tears mixed with the sweat on her cheeks, tears of pain and of a love so immense it was overwhelming. Save the romance, she teased weakly, a grimace twisting her lips as another contraction began to build. For when I'm not trying to push out your children. His laugh, a soft, warm sound, was interrupted by Dr. Reynolds returning. The doctor's smile was calm and encouraging. All right, Mrs. Chosen, you're fully dilated. It's time to meet these boys. What followed was the most intense, wonderful, and terrifying experience of her life. It was a primal, elemental struggle, pushing her to the absolute limits of her endurance. And through every push, every moment of doubt, when she thought she couldn't go on, Isel was there. He held her hand, his face a mask of fierce concentration and love, whispering encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. And then, the first cry, a sharp, piercing, beautiful sound that cut through the sterile air of the delivery room. He's perfect, Dr. Reynolds announced, her voice filled with professional joy. She briefly placed the squalling, wriggling infant on Kaylee's chest, a warm, wet, shockingly real weight, before a nurse whisked him away for quick checks. And his brother, the doctor said, her focus immediately returning to Kaylee, is right behind him. For minutes later, their second son arrived, his cry just as strong, just as vibrant, as his brother's. Kaylee collapsed back against the pillows, utterly exhausted but elated, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the effort. As the medical team efficiently cleaned and examined both babies, a hum of quiet, professional activity, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. They were here. They were safe. They're both healthy, Dr. Reynolds assured them, her smile beaming. Good size for twins. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, and 6 pounds, even. ready to meet them properly. Isel, his own face pale but radiant, helped Kaylee sit up. The nurses, their faces wreathed in smiles, brought their sons, now cleaned, swaddled in soft white blankets, and looking impossibly tiny and perfect. The moment the first baby was placed in her arms, everything else in the world fell away. The conspiracy, the danger, the contracts and business deals that had brought them to this point. It all dissolved into meaningless background noise. There was only this tiny, perfect human, their son, their love made manifest. Aiden, she whispered, the name they had chosen weeks ago, feeling absolutely right as she looked down at his perfect, miniature face. Across the room, Isel cradled their second son, his large, capable hands looking impossibly huge as they held the tiny bundle. He looked down at the baby with an expression of such profound wonder it brought fresh tears to Kaylee's eyes. "Ethan," he murmured, his voice thick. He then laughed softly, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, as a tiny hand, with perfect, minuscule fingers, gripped his thumb. "Strong already. Like their mother. Like both of us," she corrected, looking up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "We did this. Together." His eyes, shining with love and amazement, met hers across the room. "We did everything together," he said, his voice filled with awe. "From that first meeting in my office, to this moment, right now." He shifted carefully to sit on the edge of her bed, arranging Ethan so both twins were nestled close together, a tiny tableau of their new family. She studied their faces. Aiden had her green eyes, a soft, mossy green. Ethan had Isel's intense, steel-gray gaze. Both had their father's dark, silky hair and her delicate features. They were perfect, impossible combinations of them both. "Your sister is outside," a nurse informed them softly, "along with Mr. Chun and your security chief. They're rather insistent about meeting the newest chosens." Isel looked to Kaylee, a silent question in his eyes. At her tired but happy nod, he called them in. Rain entered first, her usually vibrant, energetic face already streaked with tears. "Oh, big brother," she whispered, moving to kiss Isel's cheek before her attention was completely captured by the babies. She gently touched each nephew's tiny hand, her expression one of pure, unadulterated love. "They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful." Marcus stayed by the door, ever the professional, but his usually stoic face was broken by a wide, genuine smile. "Congratulations, sir, ma'am. Security report is all clear, and Agent Davies has doubled the patrols until you're ready to return home." "Thank you, Marcus," Isel said warmly, his voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond professional courtesy. For everything. Their friend, for he had truly become that, a trusted ally forged in the fires of their shared crisis, simply nodded, his eyes shining with pride. As their small, carefully chosen circle of trusted people took turns marveling at the twins, Kaylee watched Isel. He never moved far from her side, his attention a constantly shifting but ever-present force, split between their sons and her comfort. The fierce, almost frightening protectiveness she had first glimpsed on their wedding night had evolved into something even stronger, even deeper, a profound, unshakable devotion to his family. Later, when they were finally alone again, the room quiet save for the soft breathing of their sleeping sons in their hospital bassinets, Isel pulled something from the pocket of his jacket. A familiar, dark velvet box. "I had this resized," he said softly, opening it to reveal her engagement ring. The one he had given her that very first day, the one that had symbolized the beginning of their transactional arrangement. "I thought, maybe it's time to make things official. No contracts this time. Just us." Her heart swelled as he gently took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. It felt different this time, heavier, imbued with a new, more powerful meaning. "I thought we were already official," she teased gently, her voice husky with emotion. "The first time was a business arrangement that, against all odds, turned into love," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, just above the glittering diamond. "This time it's a choice. My choice. To love you and our sons for the rest of my life. No conditions. No terms. No end date. Just love," she whispered, drawing him down for a tender, lingering kiss. "Just love," he agreed against her lips. A small, plaintive cry from one of the bassinets interrupted them. Isel moved immediately, lifting Aiden with a practiced gentleness that was breathtaking to watch. "Hungry already?" he asked softly, bringing their son to Kaylee. "Just like your mother. Always thinking ahead." As she settled Aiden to nurse, a small, contented sound filling the room, Ethan began to fuss. Soon, Isel was seated beside her on the bed, cradling their second son, patiently waiting his turn. "I never thought I could have this," he admitted quietly, his gaze fixed on their children with a look of pure wonder. After Adrian, "I thought love was just another business transaction, something to be negotiated, managed, and controlled. And now?" Kaylee asked softly, shifting a now-sated Aiden to her shoulder to burp him. Isel's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. "Now I know it's the most powerful force in the world," he said, his voice filled with a conviction that was absolute. "Strong enough to break through every wall, heal every wound, create miracles like these." He nodded toward their sons. "Strong enough to turn a contract into a covenant." As if in agreement, both twins made small, contented sounds, settling back into a peaceful, milky slumber. Kaylee laughed softly, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness, as she traded babies with Isel so Ethan could nurse. "We should send Morrison a thank you note," she mused, a touch of dark humor in her voice. "Without his schemes, we might never have found each other." "I would have found you," Isel said, his voice quiet but certain. He looked at her, his eyes serious. "Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as dramatically, but souls like ours, they're meant to meet." Looking at their family, this impossible, beautiful miracle born from business arrangements and criminal conspiracies, but transformed by a genuine, powerful love, Kaylee knew he was right. Some love stories started with grand, romantic gestures or chance meetings at a coffee shop. Theirs had started with contracts and conditions, with walls built high and hearts carefully guarded. But that only made its triumph all the more beautiful, a testament to the fact that real love couldn't be engineered or controlled. It could only be chosen, cherished, and allowed to grow into something stronger than any force trying to break it. As their sons drifted to sleep in their arms, Kaylee met Isel's adoring gaze and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was just the beginning of their real story, the story of their life together. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the birth of the twins, 3 months that felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The world of Isel and Kaylee chosen had been completely remade, not by corporate takeovers or market fluctuations, but by the tiny, demanding, and utterly perfect tyrannies of their sons, Aiden and Ethan. Kaylee sat in her office, a space that was now a seamless extension of Isel's, connected by a private, soundproof door. The sterile, corporate feel had been softened with personal touches, plush rugs, comfortable armchairs, and one entire wall covered in framed photographs. There was Aiden's first, gummy smile, Ethan's determined, and ultimately failed, attempt to crawl at 2 months, the whole family on a windswept beach in the Hamptons, Isel holding a baby in each arm, his face alight with a joy so pure it was breathtaking. The Ice King had been completely and irrevocably dethroned by 2 tiny princes. Adjacent to their offices was a state-of-the-art nursery, staffed by a discreet and highly trained nanny. It was a space filled with soft light, gentle music, and everything their sons could possibly need, a physical representation of the secure, loving family life that Adrian had once tried, and failed, to engineer for her own nefarious purposes. But even amidst the profound happiness and domestic bliss, Kaylee's analytical mind never truly rested. The Project Phoenix case was officially closed. Morrison, Hartford, and dozens of their associates were awaiting trial, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Yet, a single, loose thread still bothered her: Adrian. While she was also in custody, her role had been painted by her high-priced lawyers as that of a pawn, a manipulated woman blinded by love for James Hartford. Kaylee knew better. The woman who had orchestrated such a complex, long-term deception was no one's pawn. Driven by this lingering unease, Kaylee had kept one of her tracking programs running, a digital bloodhound sniffing through the dark corners of the web for any mention of Adrian or the key players. This morning, it pinged. The alert led her to a set of court documents, sealed for 2 decades, that her program had finally managed to unseal through a sophisticated algorithm. Her blood ran cold as she read them. Adoption papers. Reynolds, Adrian. Age, 7. The document detailed her adoption by the wealthy Reynolds family after 3 tumultuous years in the foster care system. "Isel," she called out softly, her voice steady despite the sudden, chilling clarity that was beginning to form. "You need to see this." He appeared in her doorway instantly, his senses, as always, attuned to the slightest shift in her tone. He had been in the nursery, and a small, telltale smudge of what looked like pureed pears was on his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He wiped it away absently, his focus immediately on the screen, on her face. His expression shifted from paternal warmth to sharp-edged concern as he read the documents over her shoulder. "She never mentioned being adopted," he said, his voice a low, stunned whisper. "There's more," Kaylee said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up a web of interconnected files she had been building for weeks. The Reynolds family. They weren't just wealthy. They were the primary shareholders in a national chain of fertility clinics. She highlighted a key passage in a financial report. And what was the name of that chain? Isel leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Phoenix Medical Group. The name hung in the air between them, a ghost from their recent past. Understanding, cold and horrifying, dawned in Isel's eyes. Project Phoenix, he breathed. It wasn't just about a corporate takeover. It wasn't even her idea, not originally. No, Kaylee said, her mind piecing together the final, tragic parts of the puzzle. She brought up more records, incorporation papers for Morrison's first shell companies, dated 3 years ago, long before Isel had even met Adrian. Look at the witness signatures on these early documents. They're dated exactly 1 week after the Reynolds' entire clinic chain went into catastrophic bankruptcy. After failing FDA approval for their experimental treatments, Isel finished, reading from a news clipping on the screen. His voice was grim. "Treatments designed to guarantee multiple births," Kaylee said, her hand instinctively moving in the direction of the nursery, where their own precious, scientifically influenced son slept peacefully. Isel, this was never just about money or power for her. This was personal. This was about rebuilding her parents' failed legacy. He sank heavily into the chair beside her desk, running a hand through his hair. The dots connected with dizzying, sickening speed. "She approached me at that charity gala. Said it was a coincidence, that we were seated at the same table by chance. It wasn't." Kaylee's fingers flew across the keyboard, her analytical mind a whirlwind of connections. The Reynolds family lost everything in the bankruptcy. But Adrian, their perfect daughter, had already made connections through their social circle. "She knew you were looking to expand chosen industries into medical research. She targeted you." "The perfect target," Isel said, his voice a mixture of residual anger and a new, surprising note of pity. "A company with the resources to fund her research. A CEO she thought she could manipulate through marriage. But it went even deeper than that," Kaylee said, pulling up a new set of files, psychological evaluations from Adrian's childhood adoption interviews. The reports were heartbreaking. They painted a picture of a brilliant, lonely little girl, passed from one foster home to another, who quickly learned that her only currency was perfection. Look, every foster home, every potential family. She was obsessed with proving her worth through success, through achievement. The Reynolds chose her because she was already exceptional at 7, Isel realized, his voice hollow. Top grades, perfect behavior, emotionally contained. She was the perfect daughter to replace the children they couldn't have. And when their fertility empire, their dream, collapsed, she made it her life's mission to rebuild it herself. But bigger, more ambitious, with none of their ethical constraints. And Morrison wasn't just a business partner, Kaylee added, pulling up his file. His mother was a lead researcher at one of the Reynolds clinics. He grew up in that world. He understood Adrienne's drive, her obsession to fix what her adoptive parents had lost. Her laptop pinged again. A new email from a deeply encrypted, untraceable source. The message was simple and chillingly intimate. "Family isn't about blood. You of all people should understand that, Kaylee." "Adrian," Kaylee whispered, her skin crawling. "She's monitoring our searches. She wants us to know she's watching." Before Isel could react, before he could summon security, her computer screen flooded with a deluge of documents. Private journals, medical records, research notes spanning decades. And then, a voice, cool and controlled, filled their offices, emanating from their integrated speaker system. It was Adrian. "My parents chose me because I was perfect," her voice said, making them both tense. Then they lost everything trying to help other, less-than-perfect families have their own perfect children. But they were thinking too small. Security teams, alerted by an automatic silent alarm, burst into the offices, their faces grim as they began tracking the signal, But Adrian continued, her voice a disembodied, venomous sermon. Project Phoenix isn't just about fertility drugs or corporate takeover. It's about control. The ultimate control. The power to give, or withhold, the one thing everyone on this planet wants. Family. Her laugh was a bitter, brittle sound. You think you've won, Isel, because you have your perfect, genetically advantaged twins? Those boys are just the beginning. They are the proof of concept. Our formula works. And soon, every desperate couple, every failing fertility clinic, every adoption agency, they will all come to us. Isel moved silently to the nursery door, positioning himself protectively, a sentinel guarding his most precious treasures. Kaylee followed, needing to be close to their sons to feel their presence. You don't understand family at all, Kaylee said, speaking to the invisible presence in the room, her voice shaking with anger. It's not about perfection or control. It's about love. Love. Adrian scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. Love is a weakness. Look what it did to my parents. Bankrupted them. Look what it did to the great Isel chosen. Melted him into a sentimental fool with a contract wife and 2 engineered children. You're wrong, Isel said, his voice quiet, but deadly. Love made me stronger. It made us stronger. As if on cue, the twins stirred in the nursery, perhaps sensing the tension in the air. Aiden let out a small, fretful whimper, and the sound had both parents moving instantly, instinctively, to comfort him. How touching, Adrienne's voice dripped with sarcasm. But while you're playing happy family, our research continues. Those backup files you think you have secured with the FBI? Check again. Kaylee rushed back to her computer, her heart sinking as she saw what Adrian meant. Entire servers of the recovered data were being wiped clean, a digital fire consuming the evidence. But as she watched the deletion patterns, something felt off. It was too neat, too theatrical. Wait, she said suddenly, her fingers flying across the keyboard, following a wild, improbable hunch. These deletion patterns, they're familiar. She pulled up the logs from the night of the penthouse attack. The original Project Phoenix files, the ones stolen from the FBI evidence locker last month, they weren't stolen at all. Understanding dawned, brilliant and complete. You planted them, she said to the empty room. You let them be stolen, so we'd focus on recovering that data, while you launched something much bigger, somewhere else. Very good, Adrienne's voice purred, a hint of admiration in her tone. I was trained as a financial analyst too, you know. Before the Reynolds family lost everything. I know how minds like yours work. But Kaylee was already ahead of her, her mind a supercomputer of intuition and logic, tracing the real data trail, following the faint digital breadcrumbs Adrian had tried so hard to erase. The new research facilities. The mass production plants. They're not in Singapore, Kaylee said, her voice rising with triumph, looking at Isel. He recognized her tone, the one she got just before a major breakthrough. They're right here, she continued, her voice ringing with certainty, hidden in plain sight. The old, abandoned Reynolds Clinic buildings, converted under new shell company names. It was so obvious, so sentimental, that no one ever thought to look there. The silence on the speakers was deafening. She had found her. She had unraveled the final, most personal layer of the deceit. That's why you're doing this now, Kaylee pressed her advantage, her voice strong. This personal, desperate attack. Because you know that in a few minutes, FBI teams will be raiding those facilities. Your parents' legacy. Your life's work. All of it, exposed. You understand nothing. Adrian hissed, her voice finally breaking, the cool control shattering to reveal the raw, wounded child beneath. Those clinics, they were my home. The only place I ever felt I belonged. I had to fight for every single bit of it. And you with your perfect little family, you were just handed everything, Kaylee interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. Against your schemes, against your manipulations. But that's the difference between us, Adrian. I chose love. You chose control. Control is the only thing that lasts. Adrienne's voice turned cold again, a final, desperate gambit. But don't worry. You'll understand soon enough. When your perfect little twins start showing some of the unexpected side effects from our treatments. When every mother in the world who wants guaranteed multiples comes begging us for our formula, because it's the only one that works. It's over, Adrian, Isel cut in, his voice pure ice. FBI teams are moving in as we speak. Morrison has already given up the locations in exchange for a deal. Even James Hartford is cooperating fully. James? For the first time, Adrienne's composure completely cracked. The sound was of a heart breaking. He wouldn't. He knows what this meant to me. He knows you used him, Kaylee said quietly. Like you used everyone. Because you never learned the real meaning of family. The speakers went silent. A few moments later, Marcus received a confirmation on his secure line. Adrian had been arrested, trying to set fire to a laboratory in one of the old clinic sites. It was a pathetic, final act of defiance. In the sudden, profound quiet of the office, Ethan began to fuss. Kaylee lifted him from his crib, holding him close, breathing in his sweet, milky baby scent as Isel cradled a now sleeping Aiden. She actually pitied us, Kaylee said softly, her heart aching for the woman who had caused them so much pain. She thought love made us weak. She never understood, Isel said, pressing a gentle kiss to Aiden's dark, silky hair. Real family isn't about perfect children or guaranteed results. It's about this. He looked at Kaylee, his eyes filled with a love that was deep and abiding. Choosing each other. Every single day. Through every single battle. The twins, as if sensing the gravity and peace of the moment, reached for each other across their parents' arms, their tiny fingers brushing. Even at 3 months, their bond was palpable, a connection born not of engineered genetics, but of the unconditional love that had surrounded them from the moment of their conception. We should help her, Kaylee said suddenly, the thought surprising even herself. Not legally. She has to face the consequences of her actions. But afterward, she needs to understand. About family. About love. Isel studied her, his face filled with a tender, awestruck amazement. This, he said softly, is why I love you. Your heart stays open, even after everything. Our boys deserve to know the whole story, she replied, her gaze moving from her husband to her sons. They deserve to know how love transformed a business contract into a real family. How their Aunt Rain welcomed me without a moment's hesitation. How Marcus became more than just an employee. And how their mother's brilliant mind and beautiful, courageous heart melted the Ice King completely, Isel added, his voice soft as he leaned in to kiss her. As their sons drifted back to sleep, safe and warm in their parents' arms, Kaylee reflected on Adrian's bitter words about perfect families. She hadn't understood. Perfection wasn't in genetic engineering or guaranteed outcomes. Perfection was in these messy, beautiful, hard-won moments. It was in twin boys, created by science but nurtured by love. It was in a marriage, arranged by contract but sustained by unwavering choice. It was in a family, forged in the fires of conspiracy but tempered into something unbreakable by trust. As the FBI teams methodically dismantled the last vestiges of Project Phoenix, and as Adrian faced the ruins of her carefully controlled world, true family, true love, had once again proved itself to be